Mindy was born on July 16, 1955, in Brooklyn, Queens, New York, to Walter and May Schloss. She was raised in Syracuse, New York, alongside her brother, William Schloss. In her early 20s, Mindy left home and moved to Seattle, where she met Robert Conway, or simply Bob Conway. Mindy and Robert got along famously and quickly fell in love. By 1980, the couple had relocated to Alaska. Mindy had long aspired to a career in nursing. She understood the challenges ahead but was committed to dedicating long hours to achieve something meaningful to her. Mindy completed a bachelor's degree in nursing at the University of Alaska Anchorage. She worked relentlessly to enhance her knowledge and skills, earning a master's degree in public health from Johns Hopkins, an adult nurse practitioner degree from the University of Portland, and a psychiatric nurse practitioner degree from the University of New York, Stony Brook. Despite her professional success, Mindy faced numerous hardships along the way. Her mother's passing in 1999, followed by her father's in 2001, took a huge toll on her. Thankfully, Robert was there to get her through this tragic time. In the years that followed, as she recovered, Minnie developed a passion for baking. Each year, she would eagerly wait for her favorite time of year, which was the berry picking season. Mindy greatly enjoyed traveling, whether it was to some exotic destination with Robert or wherever her work took her. She went happily. She served the public in various nursing positions in both rural and urban Alaska. And on top of that, she helped a wide variety of public health programs with her excellence in the nursing field, which was reflected in Mindy's exceptional professionalism and work ethic. During the latter period of her career, Mindy devoted her practice to helping take care of psychiatric patients. She was responsible and dedicated, always willing to give more than 100%. Her passion for life shone through every day as she encouraged all the people to live their lives to their fullest potential. During all of Mindy's ups and downs, Robert was always by her side, planning his next holiday destination with Mindy to make sure she took breaks from her busy life. Just like any other day on Friday, August 3, 2007, Mindy arrived at her home on Cody Sark Street in Anchorage, Alaska after a busy day at work. She was supposed to leave for Fairbanks to tend to some patients there in a few days and was preparing for that. But on Sunday, August 5, 2007, she missed her flight out of Anchorage in all of her appointments in Fairbanks. Jerry Yett, one of Mindy's closest friends, tried to contact Mindy to figure out where she had been, but she never answered any of her calls. Bob, Mindy's boyfriend, also tried contacting Mindy and reached out for help to Jerry after failing multiple times. On August 7, 2007, one day after Mindy had failed to show up for work, Jerry called the Anchorage Police Department and officially reported her friend missing. Jerry and Mindy had been friends for 18 years. They first became acquainted while working together as nurses, and gradually they became best friends. In this busy field of work, they were each other's biggest supporters. They loved to spend time together and frequently went on small trips. They took care of each other, and Jerry would even look after Mindy's cat, Willie, when she had to go away. But everything changed in that 1 week of August 2007. On Tuesday, August 7, 2007, Detective Pam Paranor arrived with her team at Mindy's house to conduct an investigation. She met with Jerry, who claimed that earlier when she arrived at Mindy's house to check on her, she found the house to be in complete disarray. Although there were any signs of a burglary or a break-in, there were some details that Jerry found odd. It definitely was not in a state that Mindy would have left it, even if she was in a rush to leave for work. In addition to that, there was an empty bottle of wine, and knowing how restless Mindy's sleep was, the bed seemed to be too perfectly made. Taking a look around the house, detectives found that Mindy's car was gone too. Jerry told the detectives about Mindy's flight to Fairbanks, but pointed out that Mindy didn't like driving to the airport since it was so close to her place. And also she always thought that the parking there was expensive. The sudden disappearance wasn't making any sense to Jerry, but looking at the circumstances, she couldn't help but fear the worst. As Jerry grew more and more worried, the detectives decided to take a look around Mindy's neighborhood and ask people if they had seen anything, even minutely suspicious. After an initial round of questioning, a few of Mindy's neighbors, the detectives were able to gather some information. Mindy was last seen at her home at about 7 p.m. on Friday, August 3, 2007. They also learned that Mindy had frequent arguments with her next-door neighbors who were known for being overly chaotic and rowdy. From the very beginning, detectives suspected foul play and thought that Mindy's long-term boyfriend, Bob Conway, might have something to do with her disappearance. However, after multiple rounds of interrogating Bob, he was soon dismissed as a suspect when he was able to provide a solid alibi confirming that he hadn't seen Mindy that weekend. A few days later, after Bob was left off the hook, the detectives noticed some activity in Mindy's bank account. Authorities discovered that $2,500 cash withdrawals had been made at 2 different ATMs from Mindy's account. As the detectives examined the CCTV footage from the ATMs, they found it wasn't Mindy who used her debit card to make those transactions. On August 9, 2007, Mindy's car, a red 2000 Acura Integra hatchback, was found in the area of 4370 Old International Airport Road, near Alaska Air Cargo. It had been parked strangely at a spot at the airport parking lot. Luckily, that spot had surveillance cameras, and the detectives were able to obtain the CCTV footage of the car being parked and left. When Mindy's car was searched, her purse was recovered, which had Mindy's wallet, house keys, and car keys, but her ATM card was still missing. The detectives connected the dots and figured the man who left the car there and the man who made the withdrawals from Mindy's bank account must have been the same guy. To collect more evidence from the car, detectives made use of the scent transfer technology, a technology which is used to sense, transmit, and receive scent-enabled digital media. And through that, they were able to figure out that Mindy might have been sitting in the passenger seat. Even though the investigators were getting close to solving the puzzle, there were still a few pieces missing. With each passing day, detectives worked hours to hunt down Mindy's killer. However, they didn't have any potential leads. A few days after the investigation had started, Kathy Easley, one of Mindy's neighbors, eventually came forward with some crucial information about a suspicious man. She informed the detective about a 26-year-old man named Joshua Wade, who was another one of Mindy's neighbors. Kathy told the detectives that Joshua acted very strangely when the detectives were conducting an investigation into Mindy's disappearance earlier that same year. To support her accusation, she even recalled an old incident she had with Joshua during the investigation period. Allegedly, when the detectives were working to locate Mindy, Joshua came up to Kathy and asked her not to tell the detectives that he too was Mindy's neighbor. When Kathy asked him the reason behind this, Joshua told her that he already had a warrant out for him and that if the detective found out that he lived next door to Mindy, he might be caught. Kathy grew more curious listening to Joshua's eerie words and didn't hesitate to inquire further. Kathy asked why he had a warrant out for him. Joshua fumbled with his words a bit and said that he had broken into a drug dealer's home. As Joshua turned his back to walk away, Kathy thought this was something very suspicious and wondered whether she should tell anyone about it. Just a few minutes after this incident, Detective Pam arrived at Kathy's house. At that time, Kathy was scared and didn't tell Detective Pam anything. From then onwards, whenever detectives would come to speak with Kathy, Joshua would be right across from Kathy's house keeping an eye on her by peeping through his window. And it was now when Kathy had decided to tell the police about the whole incident. The name Joshua Wade didn't ring a bell for the detectives. It turned out that Joshua had a history of violence, and there were reports that Mindy had expressed discomfort around him. Based on recent findings, the detectives tagged Joshua as a prime suspect in Mindy's homicide, but the detectives still needed some concrete proof to formally charge him. Using the evidence gathered through scent transfer technology, the detectives focused on the scent from the driver's seat in Mindy's car. This was done to isolate the abductor's scent from the passengers. The FBI brought in the dogs to track the abductors, armed with samples of scent which most likely belonged to Mindy's abductor. Tracking dogs were typically used immediately after a crime had taken place, but since there was no evidence in the initial stages of Mindy's case, they were never brought in. Since the trail was weeks old, the dogs' jobs were made even more challenging. However, even after facing difficulties, the dogs traced the scent to Joshua Wade. Detectives were shocked by the dogs' findings, but sometimes these searches could be tricky, and so for confirmation the FBI used the dogs again to track Mindy's bank card, which eventually led them to Joshua's house. Even though the search didn't find Joshua as he was on the run, evidence connecting him to the crime began to emerge. When the detectives conducted a search of Joshua's house, they found a jacket that matched the one seen on the surveillance footage from the ATM. Furthermore, the jacket also had a receipt for a bank transaction whose timestamp aligned perfectly with the one in the ATM footage. His phone was recovered as well, which had a picture of a gun similar to the one used to kill Mindy. The investigation took a shocking turn when the investigators looked further into Joshua's criminal history. He was eventually identified as an ex-convict who had previously been accused of another murder. Wade was once accused of murdering a 33-year-old woman named Della Brown in 2000. The case went to trial, but he was acquitted of the murder charge back then and was only convicted on one charge of tampering with evidence and given a 6.5-year sentence in 2003. After serving little more than 3 years, Joshua was released on probation on December 12, 2006. As the search for Joshua intensified, the police started receiving tips from the public, but still Joshua continued to evade capture, leading to a cat and mouse game. Greg Wade, Joshua's father, was devastated to find out what his son had been accused of. A photo of Joshua from the ATM was released as well, and an old girlfriend recognized him. Her name was Christina Grieser, and she claimed to have driven Joshua around. Tina Grieser, Christina's mother, never liked Joshua and didn't want her daughter to be with him. Christina decided to come forward when she found out some incriminating items in Joshua's backpack which he had accidentally left behind in Christina's car. These items almost confirmed Christina and her mother of Joshua's questionable background. By the end of August 2007, the detectives were able to track Joshua down. She had gone back to Christina's apartment asking her to drive him to a safe spot. Christina was panicking as she now knew the man in front of her was a murderer. Christina told Joshua that she first needed a smoke break and went to her room. Once alone, she called the police and told them about her situation. When the detectives went to arrest Joshua, he held a few people as hostage in Christina's apartment building. The detectives were able to get everyone out safely, arrest Joshua, and take him into custody. When the detectives interrogated Joshua, he maintained a defying attitude and smirked when confronted with evidence. Lisa, another one of Joshua's former girlfriends, eventually made a crucial confession. She revealed that Joshua had confessed to killing Mindy. With this information and Lisa's further cooperation, the detectives were now working to build a stronger case against Joshua. Joshua was finally charged with multiple state and federal charges, such as carjacking, theft, and bank fraud. On Thursday, September 13, 2007, a municipal worker doing site surveying work in the woods near Nick Goose Bay Road, about 5 miles from Wasilla, Alaska, came across a severely burned and decomposing body. He contacted the authorities right away. When the detectives arrived at the crime scene to investigate, they were taken aback looking at the gruesome conditions of the body. Using dental records, they were able to identify the victim as the 52-year-old Mindy Schloss. Later, an autopsy was conducted, which confirmed that Mindy was a victim of a homicide. The killer shot Mindy in the back of her head and tried to burn her body, but that wasn't even the worst part. Some other signs showed that Mindy had been gagged and bound with zip ties. A DNA sample was obtained from the crime scene and sent for forensic analysis. The results came back and confirmed a match between Joshua's DNA and the one found at the crime scene. This placed Joshua at the crime scene and also linked him to Mindy's ATM card usage. As the detectives intensified the search for Mindy's killer, her loved ones gathered for her cremation. It was Mindy's wish that she be cremated after her time in this world. Mindy's ashes were scattered across the Mediterranean Sea, and no services were held for her. However, a few of Mindy's close friends and colleagues gathered together to celebrate her life, the joy she brought to them. Despite Joshua's best efforts to keep his ex-girlfriend, Lisa, from testifying, she finally revealed his confession. According to Lisa, Joshua had told her that he killed Mindy Schloss back in 2007 when he had recently been released from prison on probation. Joshua moved to Anchorage, Alaska, and into a house next door to Mindy's. Joshua was having a hard time with his life after prison. He was unable to pay the bills, and the fact that he was broke kept bothering him. Sometime in early August, Joshua had had a rough day at work. He returned home in a bad mood and broke into Mindy's house to rob her. Mindy was in her bathrobe at the time. She couldn't process what was happening, but still tried to cooperate as much as she could. Joshua then tied her up with zip ties, took her ATM card and PIN information from her, and then shoved her in the car while she was still alive. After traveling more than an hour north of Anchorage, Joshua drove the car to a rural cul-de-sac in a wooded area in Wasilla, pulled Mindy out of the car, and shot her in the back of the head with a .45 caliber Glock. Once he made sure that Mindy was dead, he set her body on fire. Later on, he withdrew $1,000 from her bank account. Joshua was only 26 at that time. In 2010, during a dramatic trial, 29-year-old Joshua Wade entered a guilty plea in the 2007 killing of Mindy Schloss. Within a few hours, when the jury in Alaska Superior Court was about to hand him a sentence, Joshua made a confession, which shocked the entire courtroom. Joshua confessed that he also murdered the 33-year-old Della Brown in 2000 when he was only 19 years old. This resulted in a lengthy discussion by the jury. Both Mindy and Della were murdered years apart. And while Mindy had only been shot to death, Della had been beaten to death with a rock. Joshua was traveling through Spinald with his friends when he first saw Della and returned later to rob her. He stated that he found Della unconscious, and in an intoxicated state, Joshua bashed her head with a rock before assaulting and murdering her. Later, he dumped her half-naked body in a filthy shed. Adam Bartlett, one of Joshua's defense attorneys, asked a state court to approve the plea deal reached with prosecutors, stating that Joshua had great remorse about his actions and had entered the plea deal sincerely. He added that to save his humanity, Joshua wanted the families of his victims to have closure. He added that to save his humanity, Joshua wanted the families of his victims to have closure. Although Joshua's defense lawyers claimed that their client had committed unforgivable sins in the horrific killings, they had come to see another side of him. According to them, Joshua was not the monster that people believed him to be. Joshua's attorneys provided a detailed description of his difficult life, highlighting how he endured trauma as a child. They even brought up an incident when Joshua had attempted to take his own life by drowning himself in a bathtub at the age of just 10. Because of the difficulties Joshua went through in his early life, he developed a drug addiction and soon followed his visits to psychiatric hospitals. Everything was now in front of the jury to look at. After a lengthy discussion, the jury announced the verdict. In addition to murdering Mindy and Della, the jury also found Joshua guilty on a federal charge of murder during the carjacking. Given that he stole Mindy's car, he was handed a sentence of 99 years, although Wade did manage to evade the death penalty. He would only be eligible to get out on parole after he was 95 years old 4 years later in 2014. Joshua attempted to make a deal with prosecutors in exchange for being moved to a federal facility by confessing to 3 additional murders, in exchange for a transfer to a federal prison where he could finish out his federal sentence. Joshua told the detectives that apart from Mindy and Della, he had also killed 3 other men. Although Joshua provided only vague details about those crimes, detectives suspected that he was hinting at the killings of John Martin in 1994, Henry Antowaskarock in 1999, and another unidentified man in 2000. Their suspicions were confirmed once Joshua himself confessed to murdering the 3 men. When Joshua was in his teens, he murdered the 30-year-old Henry Antowaskarock in 1999 and 38-year-old John Michael Martin in 1994, both of whom were mentally ill. Joshua claimed that he murdered his 3rd victim, who was never identified, on the same night he murdered Della in 2000. Detectives reopened all those cold cases and took another look at them. John Michael Martin died from a single gunshot wound shortly after leaving a local village and restaurant. He was discovered by police in May 1994 near a cycling track that followed Northern Lights Boulevard. Martin had been frequently visiting the village inn for at least 5 years. He regularly came in during the day-night to meet his friends for coffee. But one tragic night, John left to walk home sometime around 2:30 a.m., and just 30 minutes later, he was found dead. John's sister claimed that he was jobless and suffered from schizophrenia. John's case remained cold for years after detectives exhausted all leads. In December 1999, Henry Antowaskarock's body was discovered in room number 221 of the Alaska Budget Motel in Fairview by a maintenance worker. The medical examination of Henry's body revealed that he had been killed 2 days before his body was discovered. Henry was staying at the motel East 4th Avenue in Gamble Street for a while at the time of the murder and was paying a weekly rent of $194. Henry, too, had a mental health issue. Joshua admitted that he killed his 4th victim, an unidentified man, on the same night he murdered Della in 2000. He claimed that the man was present when he killed Della in the spinal shed. Joshua knocked him unconscious, shoved him in the trunk of his car, and drove out to a spot in a valley where he took his clothes off and shot him in the head 2 times with a shotgun. Joshua further added that killing that man didn't really bother him. After making his confessions, 34-year-old Joshua was transferred to a federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, after serving the initial years of his lengthy sentence in Spring Creek Correctional Facility in Seward. Joshua's sentence provided some closure for his victims' families. Even though they were long gone, their loved ones were here to witness justice. Mindy's best friend, Jerry Yett, said that Mindy's life was tragically cut short and she would be greatly missed and remembered as a person who was compassionate, kind, and always supportive. Joshua Wade, who is currently in his mid-40s, is serving his lengthy sentence at the United States Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, USA. There have been no updates on the case of those 3 men that Joshua murdered before killing Mindy and Della. However, authorities stated that the investigation into the cases is still open. Discover the chilling world of secret crime mysteries, where we delve into the most perplexing cold cases and unsolved crimes. Join us as we unravel hidden clues and explore haunting mysteries. Subscribe now and be part of the journey to bring these cases to light. On Friday, October 29, 1993, the students at Eureka Elementary School in Granite Bay, California, enjoyed a day full of Halloween festivities. They went trick-or-treating from classroom to classroom and participated in a fall festival. After the event ended and the students had gone home, 5th grade teacher Cheryln Hawley stayed behind to clean up. She was observed tidying up popcorn around 4:30 p.m., and the school's janitor noticed her minivan still in the parking lot at 5:30. By the time he checked the lot again around 6, the minivan was no longer there. Cheryln never arrived home, however, and her boyfriend quickly became concerned. He went to the school to look for her, but did not find her there. He called Cheryln's family to see if they had heard from her before reporting her missing. It would not be until the day of the holiday she had just been celebrating with her students, Halloween, that Cheryln would be located. That night, a deputy out on patrol saw Cheryln's Dodge Caravan minivan pulled off of East Roseville Parkway in a wooded area. The location was less than a mile away from the school where Cheryln taught and had last been seen. Curiously, it was within view of another school, Oak Hills Elementary. Cheryln's body was discovered in the vehicle's back seat. She was just 39 years old. At the time of her death, Cheryln had been going through a period of major change. She'd applied for the position at Eureka Elementary after going through a divorce. She and her ex-husband had been married for 15 years and had 3 children together, 2 daughters and a son. Cheryln's daughter Heather, who was just 14 years old at the time of her mother's death, would later describe Cheryln as the best mother ever. Cheryln was loving and full of life. She and Heather shared a love of Whitney Houston and would blast her music when they were in the car or at home cleaning, singing or lip-syncing along to their favorite songs. Cheryln's loving nature, which made her such a great mother, also helped her quickly endear herself to her students. Heather was proud of her mother for being hired for the position at Eureka Elementary because so many people had applied for it, and Cheryln was overjoyed to have been selected for the job. When interviewed even decades later, the students who had been in her class enthusiastically recalled what a great teacher she was. Cheryln's autopsy found that she had died as the result of ligature strangulation. She was found partially clothed, but tests to determine if she had been sexually assaulted were inconclusive. Authorities believe that she was killed the night she was last seen, 29th. Robbery did not appear to be the motive for the murder, as her purse and several other personal items were still inside the van. Cheryln's boyfriend and ex-husband were investigated but quickly ruled out as suspects in the case, as were Cheryln's co-workers at the school. However, investigators do not believe that Cheryln was killed by a stranger. When the case first started, there was definitely a sense that it was probably somebody who at least knew her, somebody familiar with the area, and to a large extent that remains true today, Placer County Sheriff's Detective Brian Madison stated in 2016. 16. There were reported sightings of an unknown individual sitting in a Volkswagen Beetle at Cheryln School on October 29th, but following up on that lead did not produce any useful information. Authorities also considered that Cheryln's murder may have been connected to the unsolved murder of 35-year-old Cindy Warner, who was killed in November of 1991. Like Cheryln, she had been strangled to death and disappeared in Granite Bay. She had been at her sister's house with her 11-month-old daughter. Her sister and brother-in-law left the home, and when Cindy's husband arrived at the house approximately 45 minutes after they left, Cindy's car, jacket, and shoes were there, but Cindy was not. Her young daughter had been left unattended but unharmed in her high chair. 19 days after she disappeared, Cindy's body was discovered by a quail hunter off of Forest Hill Road, east of Auburn. She was found face down amongst some trees and was wearing only a bra, although tests to see if she had been sexually assaulted came back inconclusive. Unlike Cheryln, who appears to have been killed the night she went missing, Cindy had been kept alive somewhere for approximately 2 weeks before she was murdered. In 2017, it was reported that Cindy's case was still being investigated by the Placer County Sheriff's Office and that there is a large amount of evidence available in the case. However, the Sheriff's Office is still looking for witnesses who can help them put that evidence into context to move the case forward. Investigators working on Cheryln's case ultimately concluded, based on the differing circumstances and the different behavioral patterns between the killers in each case, that the two cases were not connected. In 2015, the Placer County Sheriff's Office began a major effort to finally solve Cheryln's case. They resubmitted numerous pieces of evidence in the case, including the rope they believe Cheryln was strangled with, to the lab in hopes that advances in technology would provide them with new clues and, potentially, the DNA profile of Cheryln's killer. While they waited on the results of the new testing, they engaged in less high-tech means of investigation as well, revisiting the scene where Cheryln's body and her car were found, re-interviewing witnesses, and meticulously going through the thousands of pages of documents that make up Cheryln's case file. Detective Chris Joyce stated he believed he knew who was responsible for Cheryln's murder in 2016 and hoped that the new testing would reveal DNA evidence that could conclusively tie that individual to the murder. Unfortunately, the renewed effort and advanced testing ultimately did not identify new evidence that led to an arrest in the case. Investigators still hope that the evidence they do have will help them secure a conviction should they be able to identify the correct suspect. They believe that Cheryln's killer has already come up in the investigation in some capacity, and they continue to work trying to identify them. A permanent memorial was created for Cheryln at Eureka Elementary, bearing the names of all the students in her class who had all wanted to ensure that she would never be forgotten. Before we continue, 90% of you haven't subscribed to our channel, so if you like this video, please subscribe. It motivates us to make more content for you. Okay, let's continue. On April 4th, 2001, Michelle and Harold visited Betty's place once more to collect Erica for a family reunion. Betty was hesitant to let the little girl go due to her deep affection for her, and because she had planned for Erica to spend the Easter holiday with her, as Easter was approaching. However, Betty had no choice since Michelle was Erica's biological mother. Betty packed Erica's belongings, including her favorite doll and the new dresses she had bought for Easter, and said her farewells, unaware that it would be the last time she saw her. Harold, who had children from a previous relationship, likely influenced their decision to take the youngest of their children with them to Kansas City, Missouri. Harold brought his 6-month-old daughter, Markeisha Johnson. They chose not to take all their children to Kansas City for various reasons. One, because the apartment in Kansas belonged to LaWanda Driscoll, Harold's cousin, and also because Michelle already had her other 4 children elsewhere. Weeks passed and LaWanda Driscoll, Harold's cousin, soon noticed that she wasn't seeing Erica around. She asked Michelle about Erica's whereabouts, and she told LaWanda that Betty Brown had come from Oklahoma to take Erica. On the evening of April 28, 2001, the police received a call from an unknown man who said he's been trying to reach his friend for a while but couldn't get through to him. He asked that the police help him to conduct a welfare check on his friend, which the police did, but as they were unable to find the man at his residence, they had to search the wooded area near Hibbs Park, 59th Street at Kensington Avenue, Kansas City, Missouri. After searching for a while, the police got a call that the man they were looking for had been found, but as they were about to leave, they stumbled upon a horrific sight. It was the decapitated body of a toddler. In no time, the police had determined that the body belonged to a female toddler because the body was found naked. The police immediately found the discovery suspicious. They wondered why a toddler's body would be lying in the woods, and also wondered why no one reported that child of her age was missing in the area. The investigators were left at a dead end. Without the body's head, there was no way the investigation would progress. All they could do was determine the age and the sex of the child. They found out that the lifeless body belonged to a black female of about 3 to 6 years of age, and also that she had been abused before she was murdered. May 1st, 2001, 3 days after the body was found, a volunteer searcher found the child's head wrapped in a plastic bag about 200 yards from where her body was discovered. Beside the body was an ashtray that the police believe was the murder weapon. But even with the head found, the police could not identify the owner of the body, as the head decomposed beyond recognition. The murder soon gained national attention due to the age of the victim and how gruesome it was. The investigators continued with their investigation and hoped that the parent or guardian of the child would come forward to claim her body, but no one came. When the victim's identity could not be established, the victim was dubbed Precious Doe. Soon, many members of the public volunteered to spread the word about Precious Doe through flyers, radio, television, and papers, and even went door to door to ask questions that could provide a link to the victim's identity. The case was featured on America's Most Wanted and Cold Case files many times to identify the little girl. But even after all that, no witnesses came forward and nobody claimed the child. In December 2001, members of the public raised money for Precious Doe's funeral, which was held at Hibbs Park near where her body was found. The residents of the area came out in numbers as hundreds of people were in attendance. But even as much as the case garnered attention, Precious Doe's identity remained a mystery. In 2002, the police exhumed Precious Doe's body for an autopsy to be conducted, and the result shows that she had been seriously beaten with an ashtray and also abused before she was murdered. Police tested the ashtray for fingerprints and DNA, but nothing was found. Investigators studied the likeness of Precious Doe's skull and also created busts that showed what she may have looked like. Due to the popularity of the case, the police constantly received tips, sometimes near and sometimes far away. At a time, the police received a call from Jamaica concerning the case, but they found out that it had nothing to do with Precious Doe's identity. Soon the police became busy with other cases and the public lost hope. But Alonzo Washington, a vocal activist for Precious Doe's case, never stopped searching for answers. Alonzo posted adverts on the case in a local newspaper every year. In April 2005, at Precious Doe's 4th-year memorial, Alonzo thought of putting the ad in an African-American newspaper because the victim was a Black American and also made t-shirts with the bust picture of Precious Doe on it. And that became the breakthrough the case needed. On April 30th, 2005, Alonzo received a call from a man named Thurman McIntosh, who was later identified as Harold Johnson's father. Claiming to know all about the Precious Doe case, Alonzo listened to the 81-year-old Thurman's words, who claimed that Precious Doe's identity was Erica Green. He also claimed that his son, Harold Johnson, killed Erica Green. Alonzo questioned Thurman about why he kept the secret since 2001, and was just revealing it in 2005. Thurman claimed that the police dismissed him whenever he called to tip them about the case. Alonzo then urged Thurman to get him a strand of Michelle's hair and also a picture of Erica. Immediately after Alonzo received a hair sample from Thurman, he sent it to Detective David Bernard, the detective who led the Precious Doe case. On May 4th, 2005, Thurman was brought in for questioning, and there he told the investigators why he was sure that his son did it. When Thurman stopped seeing Erica around, he questioned Michelle and Harold about her whereabouts, to which they both answered that she was with Betty in Oklahoma. And suddenly, when the couple and Markeisha were relocating back to Oklahoma, Thurman said he suspected that Precious Doe was Erica Green. Thurman then confronted Harold and told him he knew he killed Erica, and Harold responded by saying that it was a mistake. As soon as Thurman knew the truth, he said he wanted to tell the whole world what happened to Precious Doe before he died. Although the picture Thurman provided was for one of Erica's cousins, the hair was a complete match to Precious Doe's. Finally, the police were able to pronounce Precious Doe as Erica Green. Erica Green was born on May 15, 1997, in McLeod, Oklahoma, United States of America. She was the youngest of 5 children that her mother Michelle Johnson had with her father, Larry Green, when Michelle was 8 months pregnant with Erica. She was convicted of larceny of merchandise from a retailer and was sentenced to 2 years of custody with the Oklahoma Department of Corrections, but was housed in Mabel Bassett Correctional Center because she was pregnant. Michelle had only served 1 month of her sentence when she fell into labor. She was taken to the OU Medical Center in Oklahoma City, where she delivered Erica Green. Unable to take care of Erica, she was asked to contact a guardian that would help her hold her baby until her release. Michelle contacted Erica's father, Larry Green, to get a guardian for their child. Larry would then call Betty Brown, a woman in her late 60s, who happened to be Larry's mother's friend. Betty got to the correctional facility and was asked to do a few things to gain custody of Erica. The correctional facility authorities did not conduct a background check to know if Betty was fit to have custody of the child. She only provided her driver's license and a card from Sam's Club. She was asked to sign a form. After this was done, Betty was granted custody of Erica Green on May 16, 1997. Betty loved and cared for Erica as her own child, and she described Erica as one of the most independent children she ever met. She also said Erica was a lovely girl who was always smiling, and whenever she took Erica with her to church, people loved her. Michelle was then released on probation on October 23, 1997. According to Betty, Michelle was not so interested in taking care of Erica, as she only visited Betty Brown once in a while to check on her child. In 2000, by the time Erica was 3 years old, Michelle had already found a new lover named Harold Johnson, who she later married in 2002. Michelle soon moved in with Harold Johnson to his place in Oklahoma. Once the police confirmed that the body was Erica, they looked for her mother Michelle and her partner Harold. Both Michelle and Harold had been arrested on some warrants in Oklahoma and were in the Muskogee County Jail, Oklahoma. The police wasted no time. They immediately proceeded to the facility to question Michelle and Harold Johnson. Michelle was the first to be questioned. During the questioning, the police showed Erica's picture to Michelle, who identified her daughter and wrote a note at the back. She wrote, she agreed to tell the police how the murder happened. According to Michelle, on the evening of April 2001, the family arrived home around 8 p.m. and soon Harold became high on PCP and alcohol. Michelle instructed Erica, who was in the same room with Harold, to go to bed while Michelle went to the bathroom. Before she got out of the shower, Harold had begun to complain about Erica being bad, because she refused to go to bed. After Harold told Erica to go to bed about 5 to 6 times, she became agitated. By the time Michelle came out of the bathroom, Erica was again out of her bed. She then ordered Erica to go back to her bed, but Erica remained standing. At that point, Harold kicked Erica till she lost consciousness. Michelle said she rushed to pick Erica up and placed her in a cold bathtub, but she wouldn't wake up. That was when Michelle knew something serious had happened. After about 15 minutes, Michelle took Erica to the bathroom and laid her on the floor, but Erica remained unconscious and unresponsive. At that point, Michelle and Harold knew that Erica needed medical attention, but the two decided not to seek medical attention because they had outstanding warrants. Michelle agreed not to call an ambulance because she didn't want to go to jail, even though she knew that Erica could die. For about 10 to 14 hours, Erica was still unconscious, and by the following morning she had died. After Erica died, Harold and Michelle hid her body in a baby stroller. According to Michelle, they were both scared and didn't know what to do, so they agreed to dispose of the body eventually. They waited until it got dark to make sure no one saw them, and they both took Erica's body out through the window of the house and went straight to the woods. Harold believed that leaving the body the way it was might eventually lead the police to their home, so he thought of removing the head with hedge clippers. and also disfigured the head to make recognition difficult. They wrapped the head in plastic bags and disposed of it in a dumpster at a church they found nearby. But Michelle thought that was not a good idea. She told Harold to take out the head as the smell might alert the church owners. Harold did as his wife suggested and threw the head in a wooded area at Hibbs Park. Harold then removed Erica's clothes from her body and gave them to Michelle, leaving her body in the woods. The two of them returned home and entered the room the same way they got out. No one saw what they did, but Lillian Driscoll would soon notice that Erica was absent. She asked Michelle where she was, and Michelle lied that she was lying in the room as she was sick. After Michelle gave her account of what happened, she asked the police to take her to see Harold. She told Harold that she had already confessed to their crimes and urged him to do the same. Harold became upset at first and begged Michelle to change her statement. But Michelle's mind was already made up, as she also agreed to testify against him in court. Harold later agreed to make an oral statement, where he described the way he killed Erica and removed her head. While he was being questioned, he was also shown Erica's picture, which he took and also wrote a note behind it that reads, "I'm so sorry that this happened, and I hope that you forgive me for what I have done, and I will always love you with my heart and my soul. I will always miss you, Harold Johnson." Charging the criminals in this case brought closure to many people who went all out to bring justice to Erica. In August 2005, the members of the public decided to give Erica a proper burial in her real name. Larry Green, Erica's father, unfortunately was in jail at the time. Kansas City Councilman Alvin Brooks said he and others tried to get Larry Green permission to attend his daughter's burial, but they were unsuccessful, even though Erica's family was not present at her burial. The massive number of people that helped in getting justice for her would make her happy wherever she is. Lillian Driscoll also gave her account of what she knew about the case. She said in the days before Erica's death, Harold had been beating her. Lawanda said the last time she heard of Erica was her scream from the bedroom. According to Lawanda, Erica cried a lot because she was not used to living with her mother and stepfather, and her tears earned her more beatings from Harold. She also said Harold would beat Erica for anything and everything, no matter how trivial it is. Lawanda mentioned she heard Harold telling Michelle, "You better go take care of your daughter or I'm going to do something bad." About a week later, she heard a loud bang from the bedroom, which she now believes was the kick that left Erica unconscious. While everyone was looking for Precious Doe's identity, Lawanda said Michelle also helped hand out flyers to people and even cried at the girls. According to Lawanda, Michelle always had a response for anyone that asked questions concerning Erica. On May 5, 2005, Michelle and Harold were charged with the murder of Erica Green, endangering the welfare of a child, abandoning a corpse, and tampering with physical evidence. Michelle was not tried until 2007 when she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and other related charges and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. As soon as Harold knew that Michelle was going to testify against him, he started saying things that would implicate her. He mentioned that Michelle never cared about Erica in the first place. He said Michelle would sometimes neglect Erica to go and use drugs, but everything he said is not new to the investigators. Harold didn't go to trial until 2008. Although Erica's autopsy listed her cause of death as a closed head injury, which occurs when the head hits an object, it wouldn't have been equal to first-degree murder. But the neurologist testified that Erica may have survived if she had received medical attention in the hours before her death. After a few days of deliberation, the jury found Harold guilty of first-degree murder, endangering the welfare of a child, and abusing a child. In November 2008, Harold was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Harold appealed, claiming still that he isn't the type of person the state said he is. There was back and forth between the defense attorney and the state attorney, with Harold's team claiming that the murder was not premeditated. However, the state believed that Erica's murder was premeditated. During Michelle's confession, she mentioned that on the night of Erica's murder, she told Harold not to order Erica around and that he should only give his orders to Markeisha. The state believed that Michelle's statement annoyed Harold, and at that moment he thought of killing Erica. Also, the autopsy shows that Erica was kicked multiple times, which shows that Harold intentionally continued to kick the little girl, knowing well that she could die. Judge John Torrance believed that Harold showed no remorse by appealing the judgment, claiming the murder was not premeditated. The judge called Harold a textbook sociopath who won't take responsibility for his actions and therefore ruled out his appeal. The revealing Erica's identity brought closure to those who were all out for her. This sentence scene was one of what brought relief to many people. Everyone that attended the sentencing for Erica was pleased with the judgment given to Harold, but some people wanted Michelle to also get the same sentence. Larry Green, Erica's biological father, also filed a lawsuit against the Oklahoma D.C., questioning the process for determining the custody of babies born to mothers in prison. The Department of Human Services and the Department of Corrections, however, agreed to adopt new will be referred to the Department of Human Services for proper care. Erica Green's case is a reminder that evil resides in the heart of man. While parents are known to cherish their little ones and always protect them, it is appalling and sad to know that some parents would save themselves not thinking about what might happen to their children. A lot of people who know about Erica's case have some things to say about the sentencing. Do you also think that Michelle should have gotten a more severe punishment because she was the biological mother? Let us know in the comments section. On January 6, 1982, Harold E. Bray, the sheriff of Jefferson County, Colorado, was on a United Airlines flight to San Francisco for business. As he gazed out the window while the plane was flying over the mountains west of Denver, he noticed flashes of light, 3 short bursts, followed by 3 long ones, and then 3 short again. Sheriff Bray recognized this as an SOS signal indicating that someone thousands of feet below was in distress. He promptly informed the pilot of his observation. The pilot radioed in Sheriff Bray's report to the Federal Aviation Administration, who in turn diverted 2 other planes in the area to investigate the source of the SOS. A pilot from a Rocky Mountain Airlines flight spotted a truck in the location, and the Clear Creek County Sheriff's Office was notified that there was a motorist trapped on the Guanella Pass. Just before midnight, Dave Montoya, a fire chief in Clear Creek County, was dispatched to the scene. It was snowing heavily that night and temperatures at that altitude were around 20 degrees below zero. Near the top of the pass, he came across a pickup truck stuck in a snowdrift and its driver, 30-year-old Alan Lee Phillips, sitting inside the cab. Phillips claimed he had attempted to drive across the more than 1,000-foot mountain pass on his way back to his home in Georgetown from a friend's house in Bailey when his truck became stuck in the snowdrift. He attributed his poor choice to try to make it across the pass in the heavy snow to the fact that he had been drinking earlier. He had been wearing warm clothes and had an emergency blanket in his truck, but he did not have snow chains for his tires. He had tried to walk to a nearby ski area after getting stuck, but had only made it about 200 yards on foot before he realized he would not survive the extreme weather conditions. Desperate, he used his truck's headlights to signal SOS when he heard a plane fly overhead and was extremely lucky that the signal was not only seen, but seen by someone who understood what it meant. Dave Montoya was shocked at the situation, both at Phillips' bad idea to try to make it across the pass in the first place under those conditions and the sheer luck of the SOS being seen from the sky and Phillips being saved. "We ended up picking up the guy straight out of hell," Dave said decades later. When Dave found Phillips, he had a large bruise on his face. He claimed he had sustained it after getting out of his truck to urinate. He had been blinded by the raging snow and slammed his head into the corner of his truck as he tried to get back inside. When Dave got a good look at the man he was rescuing, he recognized him. Dave had seen Phillips at the local mine where he worked as a miner. Phillips was employed there as a mechanic. It would be almost 40 years before Dave would recognize that face again. This time he saw it on television while watching the local news in March of 2021. Phillips' mugshot popped up on the screen. He had been arrested for 2 cold case murders, both of which he was accused of committing on the same night Dave had rescued him from the Guanella Pass. He had not been in the area because of a bad choice he made while driving home from a friend's house. He had instead been there disposing of the body of the second woman he had killed that day. He got his mercy. He got saved. He got his life saved. He didn't die up there, but he did bad things before that, and he's got to pay for them, Dave told the media after learning of Phillips' arrest. Annette Schnee graduated from East High School in Sioux City, Iowa in 1978. She attended school in Nebraska before moving out to Colorado. She had a laid-back personality and was a free spirit who had hopes of one day becoming a flight attendant. At the beginning of 1982, 21-year-old Annette was living in the Colorado town of Blue River. She worked 2 jobs, one at the Holiday Inn in Frisco and the other at the Flipside Bar in Beaver Run. On January 6, 1982, she left work at the Holiday Inn early because she was not feeling well. She went to a nearby medical center in Frisco and then got a ride to a pharmacy on Ski Hill Road in Breckenridge. At the pharmacy, Annette was seen speaking with a woman she appeared to know, although the woman's identity has never been determined. When she finished at the pharmacy, Annette went outside to hitchhike home. Hitchhiking was a common behavior for Annette, as well as for the residents of what was then still the relatively small town of Breckenridge. Annette was last seen at 4:45 p.m. She did not report to or call out of her 8 p.m. shift at the bar that night. Annette was quickly reported missing. Her supervisor at the Holiday Inn filed a report the morning after she was last seen when she did not show up for her shift. However, despite this quick action, it would be nearly 6 months before there were any answers in her disappearance. On July 3rd, a young boy out on a fishing trip with his father found Annette's body face down in Sacramento Creek in a rural area in Park County, approximately 20 miles away from Breckenridge. Because she had been in cold water, her body was preserved enough for an autopsy to be performed despite the amount of time since her death. But testing to determine if she had been sexually assaulted could not be completed. She had been found fully clothed but with her clothing in disarray. Annette was not the only woman to vanish from Breckenridge on the night of January 6th. Just a few hours after Annette was last seen, 29-year-old Barbara Jo Oberholzer, who went by Bobby Joe, also vanished from the small mountain town. Bobby Joe was a native of Wisconsin who moved to Colorado with her husband, Jeff Oberholzer, in May of 1980. She was the loving mother of an 11-year-old daughter. Bobby Joe had never hurt anyone in her life, according to her sister Lori, and had a kind soul that resonated with both humans and animals. She raised baby birds from the time they hatched until they could fly and was training a previously wild Mustang. She had big dreams and made meticulous plans to achieve them. She carried a notebook with her full of detailed notes and potential budgets for a horse corral she and her husband hoped to construct on their property. Bobby Joe had gone out for drinks with some of her co-workers on the evening of January 6, 1982 to celebrate a promotion she had just received. She had been working as a secretary at a local real estate developer's office and had just been promoted to office manager. The group went to the Village Pub at the Bell Tower Mall in Breckenridge. Bobby Joe called her husband, Jeff, to tell him she would be going out to celebrate and he had offered to pick her up from the bar. She told him that he didn't have to and that she would hitchhike back to their home in Alma, Colorado. She was an experienced hitchhiker who had her own set of safety rules she followed when she was getting rides, like avoiding vans and never getting into a vehicle with 2 men. Bobby Joe's co-workers offered to give her a ride home as well, but she wanted to leave her home earlier than any of them did. Bobby Joe was last seen at the bar at 7:50 p.m., just 3 hours after Annette was last seen. Jeff fell asleep that night but woke up at 11:30, worried that his wife had not arrived home. By 1:30 a.m., he was panicked because he knew the bars were closed and that Bobby Joe still had not gotten home. He drove to Breckenridge and spent the remainder of the night looking for her. By the time the sun rose, Jeff had filed a missing persons report, and he then organized his friends into search parties. Some of Bobby Joe's possessions were found that morning, but she herself remained missing. A rancher found her driver's license off of Route 285 and Jeff found her backpack not far from that location. Then a more concerning clue was found: Bobby Joe's glove, covered in blood. Around 3 p.m., some of Bobby Joe's friends discovered her body on a snow embankment near the summit of Hoosier Pass. This site was just 10 miles away from where Annette's body would eventually be found. Bobby Joe had been shot twice. She had one grazing wound to her breast and had been shot once in the back. It appeared Bobby Joe had managed to get away from her killer, who then shot at her as she ran to escape. Her autopsy found no signs of sexual assault. Annette and Bobby Joe had not known each other, but their cases were quickly linked. This was due in part to the similar circumstances of the cases. Both women had been hitchhiking out of Breckenridge on the same night and taken to isolated areas where they were killed. It was determined that both women had been shot with either a .38 or .357 handgun. The cases were most directly linked thanks to a more unusual clue, a pair of distinctive orange booties. One of the socks was found on Annette's body, while the other was located at Bobby Joe's crime scene. Authorities believed that the two women's killer must have been a local because of the remote high-elevation locations where the bodies were found. As Bobby Joe's husband, Jeff Oberholzer, was immediately looked at as a potential suspect, but he had an alibi, passed a polygraph examination, and was later cleared by what would prove to be the most important clue in the case: DNA. Testing on Bobby Joe's bloody glove initially could only determine the blood type of the blood, and it was the same type Bobby Joe herself had, leading to the assumption that the blood had come from her. Decades later, investigators were able to develop a DNA profile from the glove as well as from a tissue that had been found with it. The profile actually belonged to a man. Decades after Bobby Joe was killed, 11th Judicial District Attorney Linda Stanley would hail her as a fighter and a hero. Because Bobby Joe had been brave enough to fight her killer with enough force to draw his blood, she had provided investigators with the critical DNA evidence. The profile was uploaded to a national database in 2002, but no match was found in the ensuing years. Numerous potential suspects were considered in the case in the decades following Bobby Joe and Annette's murders. 8 or 9 men who knew either Annette or Bobby Joe, at least 4 serial killers and known rapists who operated in the area, were all investigated but eventually ruled out by the DNA evidence. After the case was featured on the television show Unsolved Mysteries, a psychic called in claiming that a man on death row in Idaho was Bobby Joe and Annette's killer, but his DNA was not a match to that from the crime scene either. Investigators Charlie McCormick and Richard Eaton spent decades dedicated to the case. Richard was assigned to the case in 1984 while he was employed as an investigator for the Summit County Sheriff's Office and continued working on it in his free time after he retired 15 years later. Charlie had moved to Breckenridge in 1976 after retiring as a Denver homicide detective because he had grown tired of such investigations and the stress that they caused. In Breckenridge, he became a private investigator, but took an interest in Annette and Bobby Joe's case. Annette's family hired him in 1989 to work as a private investigator on the case, which helped him gain access to law enforcement files related to the investigation. He charged the family $1 per year for all of his work. In 1999, both Charlie and Richard joined the district attorney's task force dedicated to the case, which was later transferred to the jurisdiction of the Park County Sheriff's Office. With no luck finding a match to the DNA from the crime scene, incremental databases, or amongst identified suspects, investigators ultimately turned to the more novel approach of using genetic genealogy to identify the contributor of the DNA. Working with United Data Connect, a Colorado-based genetic genealogy firm co-founded by former prosecutor Mitch Morrissey, investigators identified over 12,000 people who were biologically related to the man whose blood was left on Bobby Joe's glove. Numerous individuals were asked and agreed to provide samples of their DNA to help place the killer in the extensive family tree more accurately. It took over a year's worth of work, but genealogists were able to eventually narrow down the pool of potential suspects and identify Alan Phillips as a likely match to the DNA from the blood on the glove. Investigators surveilled Phillips for several weeks in hopes of surreptitiously collecting a sample of his DNA so they could compare it to the DNA from the crime scene. One day in February of 2021, they witnessed him purchase fast food and take his trash in with him to the post office. He left the post office without the trash, and the investigators collected it from the trash can. DNA was extracted from the saliva on a napkin left with the trash and found to be a match to the DNA from the blood found on Bobby Joe's glove. On February 24, 2021, the now 70-year-old Alan Lee Phillips was arrested and charged with 2 counts each of first-degree kidnapping, first-degree assault, and first-degree murder in connection to Annette and Bobby Joe's murders. He was taken into custody without incident after being arrested during a traffic stop. By this time, he was semi-retired and had 3 children from a marriage that had ended in divorce. He had remained in the area following Bobby Joe and Annette's murders and was a longtime resident of Dumont, Colorado. Following Phillips' arrest, Jeff Oberholzer released a statement that concluded by saying, "I cannot thank enough all who never gave up the search for the truth. They are, without doubt, extremely dedicated and extraordinary individuals." Phillips is finally in the hands of the judicial system. May justice be served. Phillips pled not guilty to all of the charges against him, and his trial began on August 29, 2022. On September 15, 2022, after 4 hours of deliberation, a jury found Phillips guilty of all 8 charges he was facing. Phillips' identification and conviction inspired complex emotions for Annette and Bobby Joe's surviving relatives. Annette's older brother Russell, who attended the trial along with Annette's 2 sisters, was glad that his mother had lived to see her daughter's killer convicted, as she had long feared that she would not be able to do so. He was also grateful to all of the individuals who had spent so much time dedicated to his sister's case and had ultimately identified Phillips. However, he is hesitant to say that Phillips' conviction makes him happy. He had a stone face. He didn't move. No expression. No remorse. "That's one of the things I'm not happy about. No details. No motive," Russell said of Phillips' reaction in the courtroom to his conviction. "I want to know what fear my sister felt, the pain she felt, and I wish that he would endure that himself." Bobby Joe's sister, Lori, was unable to travel to Colorado for the trial, but stated that the emotion she felt after learning of Phillips' conviction was between relief and satisfaction of finally knowing that he had been convicted on all counts. "It was a very emotional thing to hear." Phillips is due in court for his sentencing on November 7, 2022. He faces life in prison. Lillian DeClo was born in 1905. Throughout her life, she devoted herself to helping others, particularly through her roles as a nurse and teacher. Known for her kindness, patience, and caring nature, Lillian was cherished by everyone she encountered, including her students, patients, co-workers, and neighbors. Among those who loved her was her niece, June Nicholas. In her younger years, Lillian played a significant role in caring for and educating June, along with her siblings and cousins. As Lillian aged and began to experience memory loss and other age-related illnesses, June took on the responsibility of caring for her. Lillian eventually moved to Pompano Beach, Florida, to spend her later years in tranquility. At 89, Lillian DeClo was widely regarded as a model of a life well lived, having dedicated her career to serving her community as both a teacher and a nurse. She spent her retirement in her yellow brick home at 1550 Northwest 7th Avenue, Pompano Beach, leading a quiet and uneventful life until a violent intruder shattered her peace by entering through her bedroom window. April 29, 1994 was a Saturday like any other for Lillian DeClo. She spent the day relaxing in her pink and white checkered nightgown, expecting a visit from her niece June later that evening. June had begun caring for her Aunt Lillian as she aged, and she would frequently visit Lillian to check on her and help with chores, keep track of medication, or keep her company. Around 6 p.m. on that fateful day, June arrived at Lillian's home as usual to check up on her and drop off some groceries she had gotten for her. When she entered the house, she couldn't find Lillian in the living room, so June called out asking where she was. June checked the first bedroom where Lillian usually took her naps, but still couldn't find her. Feeling slightly alarmed, June went down the hallway and looked into the bedroom on the right. There, lying on the floor, was her Aunt Lillian, who from all appearances was dead. June screamed and ran back up the hall to call 911. 2 officers from the Pompano Beach Police Department responded to June's 911 call, their minds racing with questions. It was not every day you heard of an 89-year-old woman getting murdered in her own house, so it seemed like a strange call. Upon arriving at the scene at 1550 Northwest 7th Avenue, the officers confirmed that Lillian was dead, lying on the floor beside a toppled floor lamp and a telephone with a cord pulled out. Lillian had wounds and bruises all over her face and body that indicated she had been beaten. There were bloody towels and other pieces of clothing littered around the room. The officers also noticed a broken window in the room where Lillian's body was found, where Lillian's attackers had likely entered from. The house had been ransacked, and the several broken pieces of furniture strewn across the room indicated that there had likely been a vicious struggle as Lillian fought for her life. Lillian's body was in such a shocking state that at first glance, It seemed to be a crime of passion. Lillian had contusions all over her body. Her ribs, nose, and wrist were fractured. She also had bruising around her genitals that suggested that she had been assaulted before being killed. The bruises on her neck also meant she had been strangled. The Broward Medical Examiner's Office would conduct an autopsy on Lillian and conclude that she had died from asphyxiation and also suffered a blow to the head. The telephone with the court pulled out, found next to Lillian's body, was what the attacker used to strangle her. However, there was no indication that Lillian was specifically targeted by her attacker, meaning the crime was likely not of passion. Lillian was generally beloved in her community, so she had no enemies. According to Lieutenant Earl Fluellen from the Pompano Beach Police Department, the scene of the crime and the general state of the house indicated that the case was likely that of a burglary gone wrong, but that did not make sense to Lillian's family members who knew that Lillian lived alone and did not have any money worth losing her life for. June recalled that Lillian did not have more than $50 at the house at the time of the incident. After searching the house, the only item that appeared to be missing was a gold wedding band. After gathering evidence from the crime scene, police officers began interviewing Lillian's neighbors to find out if they had heard or seen anything related to Lillian's murder. But according to the neighbors, the last time they saw Lillian was around 6:50 a.m. that morning when she went to buy a newspaper. She looked hale and hearty, and no one could recall seeing anything suspicious even though the murder occurred in broad daylight. After only a few days, detectives had come up with a list of potential suspects in Lillian's murder, but they still did not have enough to make an arrest. To motivate people to try and remember anything they could have seen or heard that could help with the investigation, the police put out a $1,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of Lillian's murderer. Pompano Beach Police spokeswoman Sandra King also told the media that the police were looking for anyone who knew anything about the crime or the man responsible for it. In an interview with the Sun-Sentinel, King said, "At this point, we are urging anyone who saw anything to call us. Some kind of human monster is walking around freely with the blood of a harmless 89-year-old woman on their hands." But despite this promising progress the investigation made in the first few weeks, all the leads soon dried up and the case grew cold. Meanwhile, June Nicholas was grieving the loss of her beloved Aunt Lillian. She had to take a whole year off of work because it was just so hard to move on without her aunt and without knowing what happened or who hurt her in that manner. The grief got so heavy that she had to ask someone else to take care of her kids for a few months because she was hurting too much to care for them. She couldn't watch the image of Lillian lying lifeless on the floor away from her mind, no matter how hard she tried. As if this wasn't bad enough, the case went cold, dashing all her hopes of discovering what had really happened to Lillian. For the next 10 years, there were no new updates in the DeClo case and it was shelved and forgotten about. But by 1999, the Broward Sheriff's Office had begun providing law enforcement services to Pompano Beach. This included taking over all of Pompano Beach's cold cases. By 2004, one of the cold cases that the Broward Sheriff's Office detectives reopened was the 1994 homicide of Lillian DeClo. Detective David Towsley with the Broward Sheriff's Office headed the investigation with the help from other detectives from the unit. They reviewed old case files, DNA databases, and re-examined evidence collected from the crime scene almost 30 years earlier. One piece of evidence that stood out was the pink and white checkered nightgown that Lillian was wearing on the day she was murdered. When they sent this nightgown to the lab to be retested, they discovered that it had bodily fluids from the male attacker, which was perhaps the most crucial piece of evidence in solving the mystery. When the police developed a genetic profile from the fluid sample obtained from the nightgown, they entered the information into the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, also known as CODIS, but they could not find a match. Once again, a promising lead had dried up, and the case went cold. However, Detective Towsley was determined to close the case of Lillian DeClo so that her family could find closure and move on. And so, even if it took another 15 years, Detective Towsley's dogged determination led him to re-examine the case in 2019 under the Broward Sheriff's Office newly created cold case unit. According to Jennifer Parker, the Broward Sheriff's Office criminalist in charge of conducting the DNA analysis of the evidence in the case, it did not initially seem like anything would come from reinvestigating the DeClo case. But thanks to advancements in DNA testing technology, Towsley believed he could unravel the identity of the individual who left their bodily fluid on Lillian's nightdress. Armed with this new technology, analysis at Broward County Crime Lab obtained a more thorough DNA profile. In 2021, Detective Towsley and his team asked the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to use the DNA profile to conduct a familial search of its offender database. That is, they ran the DNA profile through the database of registered offenders and people who had been arrested. This technique matches the DNA profile with the possible first-order relatives in the database, such as a child, father, or sibling. The search resulted in a match. The DNA from the crime scene shared overwhelming similarities with that of a known offender in the system. The offender turned out to be the son of the man whose DNA was found on the dress Lillian DeClo was wearing on the day she was murdered. This man's name was Johnny Mac Brown. Johnny Mac Brown was born in 1954, making him 40 years old at the time of Lillian DeClo murder. A Vietnam War veteran who suffered from PTSD, life after the military was not good for Johnny. His PTSD made him resort to drug use, which eventually resulted in drug addiction. And because of his mental health issues and addiction, he could not find steady jobs. For a long time, Johnny became homeless as well. When investigators were initially investigating Lillian's death, John was never considered a suspect in the case or any other crime. He was entirely under the radar. However, when police made the match with Johnny's DNA profile, it became more apparent that he was very likely the man who had attacked Lillian on that fateful day. Police also discovered a crucial piece of information. In the early 1990s through 1994, Johnny lived only a few houses away from Lillian, but detectives could not arrest Johnny for questioning because he was dead. He died of natural causes in 2010 at the age of 56. Johnny was buried in the South Florida National Cemetery in Lake Worth, Florida. In August 2022, a judge granted Broward Sheriff's Office detectives requests to exhume Johnny's remains for examination. The detectives worked with the United States Department of Veteran Affairs, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, the Palm Beach Medical Examiner's Office, and a forensic anthropologist to exhume the remains and test them for DNA. The experts took samples from Johnny's body, and the Broward Sheriff's Office criminalist, Jennifer Parker, tested them in the Broward Sheriff's Office Crime Lab, comparing them to the existing DNA profile. To get the most accurate result possible, Parker took some of the bone marrow from Johnny's rib bone for testing. The test resulted in a match with the existing DNA profile from the sample found at the crime scene. According to the Broward Sheriff's Office, the DNA results showed that the DNA from the crime scene was 66.8 trillion times more likely to be from Johnny than from somebody else. With this conclusive evidence, there was no doubt that the killer in Lillian DeClo case was Johnny Mac Brown. But that still did not explain why Johnny did what he did. The earlier assumption that it was just a case of burglary gone bad seemed to be the best explanation for the whole incident. In a press conference, Broward County Sheriff Gregory Toney explained that it was most likely a crime of opportunity. He lived close by, only a few houses down, the sheriff said. When he fell on hard times and he went homeless and had a drug habit, it indicated that he broke into the house. He may or may not have known she was there alone, but she was 89. She lived by herself, and it looked like all the drawers were opened and things were gone through the house. Police presented all the evidence they had collected thus far to the Broward State Attorney's Office. There, the prosecutors reviewed the case and concluded that Johnny Mac Brown was involved in the death of Lillian DeClo. The case was closed. Although 28 years is a long time to await justice, Sheriff Toney believes justice has no expiration date. He said, "So long as we are responsible for investigating these cases, we are going to continue to push for the necessary manpower and effort to make sure that we can bring closure to so many families who have been waiting for decades time and time again in the hope that they get some resolution." Lillian DeClo's family spent 28 years praying for answers to the mysterious circumstances surrounding the death of their beloved Lillian. Finally, they have gotten the answers they were searching for, and they can now begin to move on. June Nicholas, Denise, who found Lillian's cold body all those years ago, says she feels happy about the dedication of the Broward Sheriff's Office in uncovering the truth about her aunt's death. She believes now her aunt can finally rest in peace. "I know wherever she is, she can sleep in peace. We can move on," she said. We can die in peace because we know that it wasn't a murder that was unsolved. Although we end the story with the full knowledge of who killed Lillian DeClo, some questions cannot help but persist in our minds, demanding answers. For one, we may never know why Johnny Mac Brown did what he did or if he felt guilty about it in the years that followed. Did the investigators take too long to find out who the real killer was? Can we genuinely say that justice was served in this case? On May 21, 2003, Kathleen Folbigg was convicted of 3 counts of murder, 1 count of manslaughter, and 1 count of maliciously inflicting grievous bodily harm. The victims were her own children, all of whom had died before their 2nd birthday. She was found guilty of murdering her son Patrick and her daughters Sarah and Laura, and of manslaughter in the death of her oldest son, Caleb. Following her conviction, the media labeled her as Australia's worst female serial killer and considered her the country's most hated woman. Prosecutors at her trial claimed she had smothered all 4 children, despite the lack of forensic evidence to support this claim. Folbigg has consistently maintained her innocence, asserting that she did not kill her children. In the years since her conviction, advancements in genetics have provided increasingly compelling evidence suggesting that her children's deaths may have been due to medical rather than criminal causes. Currently, courts in New South Wales are grappling with whether Kathleen Folbigg's children were killed by her hand or if their deaths, along with her subsequent convictions, were part of a series of tragedies in a life long plagued by heartache and hardship. Kathleen was born on June 14, 1967 to Kathleen Donovan and Thomas Britton. Her life was difficult and unstable from the start. Both of her parents liked to drink, and her father had violent tendencies. Her mother left home one day after a particularly bad argument with Thomas, leaving their daughter with him. A few weeks later, on January 8, 1969, a drunken Thomas encountered his wife on the street and angrily demanded that she return home. She refused. Thomas then stabbed the elder Kathleen 24 times with a 10-inch knife. He held her in his arms and kissed her face while waiting for authorities to arrive. Kathleen did not survive her injuries, and Thomas was sentenced to 15 years in prison. He was subsequently deported to England. Baby Kathleen was just 18 months old at the time of her mother's death. She was at first taken in by her mother's sister and her husband, but they quickly reported behavioral problems in the little girl. She was reportedly aggressive, preoccupied with her genitals, and uninterested in learning hygiene or proper manners. A medical officer who assessed her at a child health center found that Kathleen had likely been abused by her father since infancy. Kathleen's behavior put strain on her aunt's marriage, and the aunt told authorities in June of 1970 that she could no longer provide care for the child. During a psychological and education assessment after she was removed from her aunt's home, Kathleen was described as a very disturbed little girl and found to have an IQ of just 77. Kathleen was placed in a foster home in the town of Newcastle, and the new environment seemed to help with her behavior and development. By the time she reached grade 2, her IQ was measured at 100, and she demonstrated good behavior and attendance at school. Behavioral problems would still arise over the years, with Kathleen being described as inattentive, disruptive, and defiant in grade 5. Kathleen left school 6 months before finishing grade 12, but not for academic reasons. She has stated that around this time, her relationship with her foster mother completely deteriorated. According to Kathleen, this resulted from ongoing issues they had. She has described her foster mother as unpredictable and controlling, which resulted in Kathleen never having many friends and being physically disciplined when she did not meet her foster mother's strict standards for her numerous household chores. Kathleen left home when she left school and moved in with a friend. One weekend soon after, she met the man who would become her husband while out dancing at a nightclub. Craig Folbigg was 6 years Kathleen's senior and worked as a forklift operator. Kathleen immediately found him charming and viewed him as a knight in shining armor who could give her support and love in her largely chaotic life. Kathleen married Craig in 1987 at the age of 18. Both Kathleen and Craig looked forward to having a family as an obvious next step. Craig came from a family of 8 children and was still processing the death of his own mother, who had died when he was just 15, and Kathleen had lacked a stable family life of her own growing up, so having children was important to both of them for their own reasons. When Kathleen became pregnant for the first time, She was very protective of her unborn child. She made improvements to her diet and made her husband go outside to smoke so that she would not be breathing in so much of the secondhand smoke. Kathleen had an easy pregnancy but a difficult delivery, which required the use of forceps. She was unable to hold her baby for a few hours but stated that she felt complete with her husband and her child as soon as she did get to hold him. Caleb Gibson Folbigg was born on February 1st, 1989. He was full-term and born at a healthy weight. Kathleen woke up around 1 a.m. on February 20th to feed Caleb and then went back to bed. When she woke up to use the bathroom 2 hours later, she went in to check on the baby while she was awake. She found that he wasn't breathing. She screamed for her husband and Craig performed CPR on Caleb while Kathleen called an ambulance. Paramedics were unable to resuscitate the baby. Caleb was just 19 days old when he passed away. His cause of death was found to be sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS. Kathleen and Craig were devastated by their son's death, but decided to try for another baby towards the end of 1989. Kathleen soon became pregnant. Her second pregnancy was obviously far more stressful, and Kathleen and Craig purchased all new bedding and made home improvements they believed would help reduce the risk of SIDS for their second child. Patrick Allen Folbigg was born on June 3, 1990. In light of his brother's death, he underwent a variety of tests when he was a week and a half old, including a sleep study, an ECG, and a barium test to check for reflux, all of which had normal results. On October 18, 1990, when he was 4.5 months old, Patrick experienced what medical experts classified as an apparent life-threatening event. Patrick had been coughing, so Kathleen went to comfort him and he went back to sleep. When she went to check on him at 4:30 a.m., Patrick was not breathing and had turned blue. He was rushed to the hospital and resuscitated. However, the brain damage the incident caused left him partially blind and suffering from seizures, which meant that he required constant supervision. Kathleen had planned to go back to work, but Craig took on a more demanding job so that she could stay home and provide Patrick with the constant care he now required. Patrick was taken to the hospital 4 more times in November-December of 1990 after suffering subsequent seizures. Patrick passed away on February 13, 1991, while Craig was at work. His cause of death was found to be asphyxia due to airway obstruction as a result of a seizure. Kathleen became depressed and preoccupied with what external factors she had failed to address that could have saved Patrick. She and Craig coped by making several major life changes, including selling the house where both their sons had died, moving to a new town, and starting new jobs. Kathleen became pregnant again and fixated on limiting her food intake and becoming as physically fit as possible for her baby. Sarah Kathleen Folbigg was born on October 14, 1993, and had a normal sleep study at 3 weeks old. Kathleen and Craig put her crib in their bedroom so that they could keep a closer eye on her as she slept. Tragically, Sarah still passed away on August 30, 1991, at 10.5 months old. During one of her checks on Sarah, Kathleen had found her blue and not breathing. Sarah's death certificate listed her cause of death as SIDS. While the death of each of their children had left both Kathleen and Craig understandably depressed, following Sarah's death, their relationship almost fell apart due to each other's poor mental states. They again sold their house and moved, this time to be closer to Craig's family. Kathleen put on weight, but then feared that this would push away her husband. She returned to obsessively tracking her diet and working out at the gym. Kathleen and Craig did separate on several occasions, but only for brief periods of time. Kathleen felt her relationship with Craig hit rock bottom during this period, but the couple was able to rebuild their marriage. Eventually, Kathleen became pregnant with her 4th child and again fixated on exercising so as to be as healthy as possible for the baby. Laura Elizabeth Folbigg was born on August 7, 1997, and soon underwent extensive medical examinations. A sleep study found that while she did not have obstructive sleep apnea, she did have mild central apnea, although this would resolve itself by the time she was 6 months old. Biochemical, metabolic, and blood tests all came back normal. She was sent home with a cardiorespiratory monitoring device to record and download information about her breathing and her heart rate while she slept. The device would set off alarm if it detected any decrease in either. The machine reassured Craig but made Kathleen anxious because of its frequent false alarms. Laura was no longer prescribed to use the device after she turned a year old. Kathleen and Craig were understandably terrified of losing Laura like they had her siblings during the first year of her life. So when they were finally able to throw a first birthday party for one of their children, they held a big celebration to mark Laura's birthday. While Laura lived longer than her siblings, she also ultimately died suddenly. She passed away on March 1, 1999 after Kathleen put her down for a morning nap when she was just shy of 19 months old. Her autopsy found that she had myocarditis or an inflammation in her heart muscle, while all 3 professors of forensic pathology called at a later inquiry stated that they would have listed Laura's cause of death as myocarditis. Because of how extensive it was, the forensic pathologist who performed the autopsy listed the cause of death as undetermined. They noted in their report that the family history of no living children following 4 live births is highly unusual. The possibility of multiple homicides in this family has not been excluded. The death of a 4th child in one family also caught the attention of the local police, and a detective was assigned to investigate Laura's death on the day it occurred. Following Laura's death, the Folbiggs' marriage finally collapsed under the weight of their grief. They went to counseling, but Kathleen moved out of their shared home in April of 1999. She had moved back in by that June, but she and Craig were separated for good by June of 2000. It was during the first period of separation following Laura's death that Craig became suspicious that his children's deaths may have been caused by his wife rather than by natural causes. While cleaning up his wife's belongings in May of 1999, he came across a diary she had written between June of 1996 and June of 1997. He began reading it and was concerned by some of its passages. In October of 1996, shortly before she came pregnant with Laura, she wrote, obviously, "I'm my father's daughter," while discussing making mistakes in her past. Since Kathleen's father was a murderer, Craig was alarmed that his wife seemed to relate to him. In another entry, she wrote, "My guilt of how responsible I feel for them all haunts me. My fear of it happening again haunts me. What scares me most will be when I'm alone with the baby. How do I overcome that? Defeat that?" Craig took the diary to the police and was interviewed. During this interview, he said that he was suspicious that Kathleen had been involved in their children's deaths. He was asked to return for a second interview 4 days later. During the time in between these 2 meetings with police, Craig went to see his estranged wife and accused her of killing the children. Kathleen was appalled and slammed the door in his face. She later returned to the home she had once shared with Craig to yell at him, telling him that he knew how much she loved their children and that he needed to tell the police the truth. Craig recanted his earlier statement when he met with police again, and he and Kathleen temporarily reconciled a short time later. Kathleen was interviewed about the diary for 8 hours one day that July. She stated that she felt like she was her father's daughter, not because they were both murderers, but because she viewed him as a loser in general and felt like she was a loser as well. She felt guilt over the deaths of her children, not because she was their killer, but because she was their mother, and she had failed to protect them from whatever it was that kept taking them from her. Authorities remained focused on Kathleen's diaries and asked her if she had any more. She turned over one she had just purchased, which she said was the only one she had. However, after investigators obtained a search warrant and searched her home, they found another diary, written between June of 1997 and April of 1998, in a bag inside of a case in the wardrobe in her bedroom. Kathleen claimed that she had not tried to hide the diary from police. She had just forgotten that she still had it. Police would eventually come into possession of 6 of Kathleen's diaries, with 5 other diaries from the period of time her children died, believed to be unaccounted for. These diaries would play a major role in the criminal proceedings that would eventually be held in connection to the deaths of the Folbigg children. On April 19, 2001, Kathleen was arrested and charged with the murder of all 4 of her children. When Kathleen went to trial in 2003, her diaries were a major part of the prosecution's largely circumstantial case. The prosecution claimed that certain passages all but admitted her guilt. "I feel like the worst mother on this earth, scared that Laura will leave me now, like Sarah did. I knew I was short-tempered and cruel sometimes to her and she left. With a bit of help," Folbigg wrote in one entry. "Can't happen again. I'm ashamed of myself. I can't tell my husband about it because he'll worry about leaving her with me. The defense claimed that the passages were merely expressions of Kathleen's understandable feelings of maternal guilt and over-examination of everything she did in an effort to understand why her children kept passing away. The prosecution argued at trial that Kathleen had smothered all 4 of her children. However, there was no forensic evidence that the children had been smothered. Smothering sometimes leaves behind physical signs, but in some cases, it does not. Laura's death was slightly more difficult to attribute to smothering simply because of her age. At almost 19 months old, when she died, she would have been physically strong enough to struggle against being smothered, which can result in certain characteristic injuries which she did not have. Furthermore, there were other known health factors that could have contributed to the children's deaths. Caleb had been diagnosed with a floppy larynx, which can make it difficult for an infant to breathe. The seizures Patrick experienced were severe enough that they could have resulted in his death. In this case, the charge against Kathleen for maliciously inflicting grievous bodily harm alleged that she had tried and failed to smother him on the occasion of his first life-threatening event, which resulted in the brain damage that led to the seizures. If Laura had not been the 4th of her parents' children to die, her death would almost certainly have been attributed to the myocarditis found during her autopsy. However, at the time, there was no such known alternative explanation for Sarah's death. While the maxim was not explicitly invoked during the trial, the prosecution's case appeared to be highly influenced by what came to be known as Meadows' Law, which states that 1 sudden infant death is a tragedy, 2 is suspicious, and 3 is murder until proved otherwise. This saying originated from Roy Meadow, a British pediatrician who coined the phrase Munchausen syndrome by proxy to describe what is now also referred to as factitious disorder imposed on another, in which a caregiver either harms or creates the illusion of an illness in another person as an act of attention-seeking behavior. Meadow spent years collecting £1,000 of taxpayer money per trial, testifying against mothers accused of killing their young children, whose deaths also could have been attributed to SIDS. One of those women was Sally Clark, who accused of murdering her 2 sons, both of whom had died suddenly. Meadow claimed that the odds of 2 children dying in a home such as Miss Clark's were 1 in 73 million, a figure which had absolutely no statistical merit. The actual odds were later calculated to be 1 in 77. Miss Clark was sentenced to life in prison in 1999, but her conviction was overturned in 2003 in light of Meadow's misleading testimony and the fact that a home office pathologist had failed to disclose that microbiology tests had indicated that at least one of her sons could have died as a result of natural causes. She never recovered from the trauma of losing her sons, being accused and convicted of their alleged murder, and being the target of abuse in prison because she was viewed as a baby killer. She died in 2007 of acute alcohol poisoning. At least 2 more convictions that relied on Meadow's testimony have also been overturned. The General Medical Council struck Middow off of the medical register in 2005 after finding him guilty of serious professional misconduct for providing erroneous and misleading testimony in court. A high court judge overturned that ruling the following year. During Kathleen's trial, the case against her relied heavily on the premise put forth by Meadow that multiple deaths within one family have to be criminal. The prosecution argued that it was not obligated to prove that the children had been smothered or be able to disprove that they could have died of natural causes. I can't disprove that one day some piglets might be born with wings and that they might fly. Is that some reasonable doubt? No. Is the hypothesis that the defense advances a reasonable doubt? No. Why not? Because if you look at what they are suggesting, not in isolation but in totality, there has never ever been before in the history of medicine that our experts have been able to find any case like this. It is preposterous. It is not a reasonable doubt. It is a fantasy. And, of course, the Crown does not have to disprove a fanciful idea, the prosecutor said during closing statements. The jury found this argument compelling. After almost 9 hours of deliberation, they returned a verdict of guilty. Kathleen collapsed in the courtroom when the verdict was read. She was sentenced to 40 years in prison with a non-parole period of 30 years. Kathleen was sent to a maximum security prison where she spent 22 hours a day alone in her cell to prevent other inmates from attacking her, and because she was considered high risk for harming herself. Over the following few years, she unsuccessfully ran through all of her rights to appeal her conviction. Her sentence was reduced during this process down to 30 years in prison with a non-parole period of 25 years. Her only remaining hope of proving her innocence and having her conviction overturned was directly petitioning to the New South Wales Attorney General in hopes of having an official inquiry opened into the case. In the years following Kathleen's conviction, the problems with Meadows' law became increasingly evident and more research was carried out about the causes of sudden infant death syndrome. It should be noted that SIDS is a blanket term describing death in infants with no identifiable cause. Despite ongoing research, we do not fully understand what leads to the majority of these deaths. Parents are advised of certain preventative measures they can take, largely involving an infant's sleeping environment, but these only reduce the risk of a child dying from SIDS, not eliminate it. Furthermore, there is increasing evidence that deaths from SIDS have a variety of causes. In terms of Kathleen's case, the most significant development in SIDS research is the discovery that in certain cases, infant deaths are brought on by previously undiagnosed genetic conditions. More than 30 different genes that increase the risk of SIDS and the related syndrome sudden unexplained death in children, which affects children over 1 year of age, have been identified. According to current estimates, up to 35% of deaths attributed to SIDS actually have a genetic component. A new group of lawyers took over Kathleen's case in 2013, and they hired several medical experts to review the data from the case. One of these experts was Stephen Cordner, a respected forensic pathologist at Monash University. He spent over a year reviewing the children's medical data and the arguments presented at Kathleen's trial, eventually producing a 112-page report that argued that the medical data pointed to the Folbigg children dying of natural causes rather than by being smothered. This report was included with the official petition Kathleen's legal team filed in June of 2015 requesting that the Attorney General's office open a formal inquiry into the case. The petition was not addressed for 3 years. Finally, on August 22, 2018, Attorney General Mark Speakman announced that an inquiry overseen by former District Court Judge Reginald Blanche would be held. Kathleen's legal team hoped to be able to provide more solid evidence that the Folbigg children had all died of natural causes, and therefore began exploring genetic causes that could explain why all of Kathleen and Craig's children had died so young. At the time, they did not have access to the DNA profiles of the Folbigg children, so they began their investigation by looking at Kathleen's DNA for clues. Professor Carola Garcia de Venosa, the co-director of the Center for Personalized Immunology at the Australian National University, was asked by Kathleen's legal team to lead the effort. She and a geneticist worked with a cheek swab and saliva sample that had been collected from Kathleen in prison and had the DNA extracted from the samples sequenced. When they sat down to study the resulting DNA data, they noticed something that could potentially be of vital importance in the case. Kathleen had a mutation in her COM2 gene. The 3 COM genes relate to the production of calmodulin in the body. Calmodulin plays a role in how calcium is transported into and out of cells, including cells in the heart. As such, one of its functions involves regulating the contractions and expansions of the muscles in the heart. Mutations in these genes can result in severe inherited cardiac arrhythmias. Variants in COM genes were known causes of SIDS, as they could result in severe cardiac problems and sudden death in infants and young children. At the time it was discovered that Kathleen had this mutation, only about 75 people had been identified as having potentially lethal mutations in any of the 3 COM genes worldwide. The specific mutation found in Kathleen had not previously been identified or, therefore, linked to any deaths. Luckily, it was possible for Professor Vinoesa to follow up on this lead, as she was able to obtain DNA samples from all 4 of Kathleen's children. 2 of the children had frozen tissue samples on file, and she was able to obtain DNA from the blood taken from the other 2 children at birth and preserved on their heel stick cards, which were still on file. Sequencing of their DNA showed that both Laura and Sarah Folbigg had inherited the mutation in the COM2 gene from Kathleen, while Kathleen's 2 sons, Patrick and Caleb, had not inherited this mutation. It was later discovered that they each had inherited 2 copies of another exceptionally rare mutation. In their cases, the variation affected a gene referred to as BSN or bassoon. Again, this mutation is very rare, but it is known to cause early-onset lethal epilepsy in mice. That is, it causes mice to experience seizures that are severe enough to result in their death while they are still very young. The deaths of the 4 Folbigg children appeared to not have a single cause as the prosecution had alleged during Kathleen's trial, but 2 separate genetic influences. The chances of 2 such rare genetic variants being in one family and causing 4 deaths seem almost incomprehensibly small. According to Professor Vinoesa, the overall small odds of Kathleen and Craig both carrying rare mutations are not as relevant as the high odds of them passing those mutations on to their children. In the end, it's not about these variations being very rare in the world, it's about the chances of Kathleen meeting someone like Craig and having this combination of mutations between both of them. Once genetics come into play, statistics go out the window, she has stated. Because of the novelty of the specific mutation found in Kathleen and her daughters, doubts were raised during the inquiry about whether or not it could be fatal. A pediatric cardiologist who was called to testify during the inquiry argued that since Kathleen herself was healthy and had lived into adulthood, it was unlikely that her daughters had died as a result of the mutation they shared. Kathleen did have a history of fainting episodes that began when she was a child, including an incident where she fainted while swimming, but luckily was rescued from the water by witnesses. Fainting while swimming is a specific symptom associated with long QT syndrome, which has been seen in individuals with COM mutations. However, during the inquiry, Kathleen was given an examination and found to not currently be showing any signs of cardiac problems, including long QT syndrome. However, around this same time, evidence supporting the theory that the COM2 variant carried by Kathleen and her daughters could have been lethal emerged. Professor Vinoesa was able to contact cardiovascular geneticist Peter Schwartz, who had just completed a paper examining data from the International Calmodulin Registry, which attempts to gather information from every individual and family affected by mutations in COM genes. One of the families he wrote about was an American family with a mutation almost identical to the one shared by Kathleen and her daughters. The family's 2 children had each suffered cardiac arrest at a young age, one at age 4 and one at age 5. One child survived the cardiac arrest, but the other, sadly, did not. It was determined that the children had inherited the mutation from their mother, who was healthy. Professor Vinoesa viewed the discovery of this other family as a major turning point in the case that provided strong evidence supporting Kathleen's innocence. Other scientists doing research for the inquiry did not view the new evidence as being so crucial, maintaining that the mutation found in the Folbiggs was likely pathogenic, but still not a likely explanation for Laura and Sarah's deaths, in part because of their young age at the time of their deaths and also because most deaths with cardiac causes tend to occur during highly active periods and the 2 girls had died in their sleep. Data from the International Calmodulin Registry does not necessarily support these critiques in cases where mutations in the COM genes are concerned. The registry describes 5 families in which their mutation was fatal in some members who inherited it, but not all of them. Approximately 20% of individuals who died of a sudden cardiac event related to these mutations died in their sleep, and 9 sudden deaths occurred in children under the age of 3. There was also a possibility that another form of stress besides exertion played a role in Laura and Sarah's deaths. Each of the girls had been sick and on medication when they died. Sarah had been prescribed an antibiotic for a cough and Laura had a respiratory infection that was being treated with acetaminophen and pseudoephedrine. The cardiovascular stress from being ill and the medication, in combination with the altered heart rhythm caused by the mutation, which left the girls more susceptible to heart problems, could have led to their sudden cardiac-related deaths. The scientific arguments did not impress Judge Reginald Blanche, who oversaw the inquiry. In July of 2019, he ruled that there was no reason to doubt Kathleen Folbigg's convictions, while he acknowledged the scientific evidence presented at the inquiry and the possibility that Laura and Sarah had heart conditions. He wrote in his judgment, even on the basis of accepting the opinion of Professor Vinoesa, that it is now plausible that Sarah and Laura Folbigg may have had a cardiac condition and that raises a possibility it caused their deaths. I do not consider the inquiry should be reopened for the purpose of holding further hearings about the COM2 variant identified in Sarah and Laura, as they had at her 2003 trial. Kathleen's diaries played a major role during the inquiry and in the judge's ruling. Kathleen's testimony during the inquiry to explain some of the passages used to point towards her guilt hurt her rather than helped her, in the judge's estimation. In reaching his verdict, Judge Blanche argued that, indeed, as indicated, the evidence which has emerged at the inquiry, particularly her own explanations and behavior in respect of her diaries, makes her guilt of these offenses even more certain. Many excerpts from the diaries are difficult to understand, but Kathleen has always maintained that they reflect the depression, lack of control, and paranoia she was feeling after losing multiple children. In October of 1997, she wrote about Laura wouldn't have handled another like Sarah. She saved her life by being different. Kathleen testified that she believed that her youngest daughter had not been taken from her so far because she was somehow different than her siblings. When Judge Blanche asked her if she believed some sort of supernatural power was taking her children from her, and she was hoping that Laura being somehow different prevented her from being taken by this power, she stated that she had believed something along those lines at the time. In discussing a January 1997 entry, in which she said she had done terrible things in the past when she was stressed, she stated, "It's a broad spectrum of things that I am using the word terrible for. Could be me placing my child down to let her cry for even 30 seconds. That's a terrible thing in my view." Judge Blanche claimed that the diaries were virtual admissions of guilt. 6 separate experts who have examined the diaries have all had the opposite opinion. The most recent expert to study the diaries, clinical and forensic psychologist Dr. Katie Seidler, who has worked with violent incarcerated offenders for over 2 decades, has stated there are no clear disclosures of any criminal or violent conduct in Ms. Folbigg's writings. Kathleen's legal team has also long been critical of short, cherry-picked phrases and sentences taken from over 50,000 words of Kathleen's writing being highlighted in court without context. Following this loss in court, Kathleen's lawyers applied for a judicial review of the inquiry's findings. While they waited to get a response, more and more scientific evidence supporting the theory that Laura and Sarah Folbigg had died as a result of the variant in their COM2 gene they had both inherited from their mother was discovered. A biochemist in Denmark, with aid from scientists from 6 countries, was able to run tests on the specific mutation using a synthetic cell and was able to show that it was just as likely to be lethal as the more well-known mutations in COM genes. A major scientific study was published in November 2020 confirming that Laura and Sarah's deaths were most likely caused by the mutation. Specifically, their deaths were brought on by the variations of their heart rhythms caused by the mutation, which left them vulnerable to cardiac problems in combination with the medications the girls had been taking. On March 3, 2021, a petition signed by more than 90 prominent scientists and medical professionals from 9 countries was sent to New South Wales Governor Margaret Beazley requesting that Kathleen Folbigg be pardoned and freed from custody in light of the accumulating evidence that her children had died as the result of natural causes. Among those who signed the petition were 2 Nobel laureates and the president of the Australian Academy of Science. The petition argued that Kathleen Folbigg has endured the death of her 4 children and has been wrongfully incarcerated because the justice system has failed her by not properly taking the new scientific evidence into account. One of the signatories, John Shine, the president of the Australian Academy of Science, later stated, "It is deeply concerning that there is not a mechanism to appropriately weigh up all the medical and scientific evidence in a case of this nature. There is now an alternative explanation for the death of the Folbigg children that does not rely on circumstantial evidence." 3 weeks after the petition was sent, the New South Wales Court of Appeal responded to the request for a judicial review of the Blanche inquest findings. They dismissed it, arguing that Judge Blanche's ruling was not at odds with scientific evidence. It would be a full year before the petition was formally answered. The actions of New South Wales Attorney General Mark Speakman, who bore more of the responsibility for deciding how to respond to the petition than the governor herself, did not seem to indicate that he would be in favor of granting the pardon. The Australian Academy of Science had offered to provide him with a panel of expert geneticists to help him go over the scientific data in the case, but he rejected this proposal. Still, on May 18, 2022, Attorney General Speakman announced that while Kathleen Folbigg would not be granted a pardon, a second public inquiry would be held to ascertain if there were any reasons to doubt her original conviction. He did not believe simply granting a pardon was appropriate because the new genetic evidence needed to undergo further scrutiny. While he had not formed an opinion on Kathleen's guilt or innocence or on whether or not there was reason to doubt her conviction, he did find that the scientific discoveries in the case did merit some form of intervention. When announcing the second inquiry, Speakman said that he had been in contact with Craig Folbigg and that he was truly sorry that he would have to go through another inquiry. Craig Folbigg believes that his ex-wife is guilty of murdering their children. Almost all of the further scientific inquiry into his children's deaths has focused on the COM2 mutation his daughters inherited from their mother, who provided a sample of her DNA to researchers. However, further research into the deaths of his two sons has been hampered by the fact that scientists do not have access to Craig Folbigg's DNA. Caleb and Patrick both had two mutated copies of the bassoon gene in question, presumably because they inherited one from each of their parents. However, Mr. Folbigg has refused to provide a sample of his DNA to confirm this. A directions hearing held in July 2022 found that Craig Folbigg's DNA was of vital importance for the inquiry, as examining it would allow scientists to determine if Caleb and Patrick, who were confirmed to have inherited one mutated copy of the bassoon gene from their mother, had inherited their second mutated copy of the gene from their father, or if it had been a de novo mutation. De novo mutations are not present in the parents of a child. They are instead spontaneous mutations in DNA that occur during early DNA replication of the child. Making this distinction would allow scientists to better determine if the mutation could be categorized as pathogenic or likely pathogenic. The lack of analysis of Craig Folbigg's DNA limits the scope of the analysis of genetic factors in the deaths of his two sons. At the hearing, it was also found that Mr. Folbigg could not be compelled to participate in the inquiry or provide a sample of his DNA. Mr. Folbigg's refusal to participate in the inquiry is largely due to financial constraints. He does not have the money to finance his legal representation for the inquiry and says that rather than being given the necessary funds from the Attorney General's office, he was given the suggestion to take out a loan against his home to pay for his lawyer. Mr. Speakman says his office did approve the use of discretionary funds for Mr. Folbigg's representation. However, according to Danny Eade, who previously represented Mr. Folbigg, this funding was limited and would only provide Mr. Folbigg with approximately 8 days of representation, which is completely inadequate for an inquiry of this scale. The upcoming inquiry will be overseen by retired New South Wales Supreme Court Chief Justice Tom Bathurst and will be conducted in 2 parts. The first part will take place in November of 2002 and examine the medical evidence in the case, and the second part will be held in February of 2023 to examine the psychological evidence. Regardless of the outcome of the inquiry and the credibility it may or may not give to the new genetic evidence, it will be a major moment in Australian legal history and shape the role science plays in the courtroom. If the new genetic evidence, supporting the theory that the Folbigg children died of natural causes, is found to be valid, the inquiry will have to decide if circumstance or science is more important in the case. Let's rewind the clock to February 6, 1960, the day a sweet little girl came into the world. Born to Edward and Norma Hutto in the charming town of Largo, Florida, she was named Carol Dean Hutto. As the youngest of the family, Carol was showered with affection and attention from everyone. Growing up, she attended Largo High School, where her kind and gentle nature made her a cherished figure among her peers. Carol's family was quite a crew. She had a half-brother, Jerry Irwin Hutto, and while details about him are limited, it's clear that Carol and Jerry shared a special and close bond. Jerry was devoted to his sister, always striving to fulfill her wishes and demonstrating their strong sibling connection. Carol also had 2 sisters, Pamela Beale Hutto and Melinda Darlene Hutto, and 2 other brothers, Maurice Barnett Hutto and Frank Hutto. Carol was a source of joy to her family, particularly to her mother. They enjoyed doing activities like going to thrilling NASCAR races and exciting wrestling matches. Her mom fondly remembers her as a devoted Christian who chose her friends carefully. Carol had big dreams and a heart full of adventure, but sadly, she didn't get the chance to fully experience them and live those dreams. On December 13, 1976, Carol Hutto was spending time at her home on Corvette Drive with her mother Norma and her half-brother, 17-year-old Jerry Irwin. Everything seemed like a usual evening. They were all enjoying themselves, sharing jokes and laughter. Norma was busy preparing dinner for the family, and Jerry was getting ready for a date. Their evening took an unexpected turn when the phone in the house started ringing. Norma went to pick up the call, and it turned out to be Carol's friend on the line, so she handed the phone to Carol and they spent a few minutes whispering to each other, but when Norma came back, she quickly ended the call. Strangely, after the call, Carol's mood took a sudden turn. She became incredibly happy and excited, which caught Norma's attention. Carol hurriedly went to her room, fixed her hair, and checked her appearance in the mirror. After about 15 minutes, she told her mom that she was heading to a store nearby which was just a 10-minute walk away from their house. Even before Norma could ask what she needed from the store, Carol was already at the door. However, before leaving, Carol made a promise that she would be back soon. Later, Carol's half-brother Jerry also left the house for his date and said goodbye to Norma. And it usually took about 20 minutes or even less for Carol to walk there and back. So Norma expected Carol to return home in a half an hour. But after 1 hour had passed and Carol still hadn't come back, Norma started to wonder if Carol had bumped into her friends on the way and was chatting with them, which might be why she was taking longer. But after 2 hours had passed and Carol hadn't come back, Norma became even more anxious. It was getting dark outside, and Carol's absence was concerning because she had never missed her curfew before. At around 10 p.m., when Jerry arrived home, Norma, deeply concerned, asked if she had seen Carol. However, Jerry was clueless about her whereabouts, just like Norma. Upon learning that Carol hadn't returned home since she left, Jerry became even more worried. Norma urged him to go out and search for her. He started combing the streets calling out her name, but didn't receive any responses. He even went to the store near their house, where Carol was supposed to go. But the store staff mentioned that they hadn't seen her today, which led to the concerning questions of where Carol might be if she didn't go to the store as planned. Jerry sadly returned home and shared the unfortunate news with Norma that he couldn't find Carol anywhere. Despite their concern, they decided to wait until morning, hoping Carol might come back home on her own. However, as the morning sunlight arrived, Norma became even more anxious because there was still no sign of Carol. Without delaying any further, Norma decided to call the police to report Carol as missing. However, the police informed her that since less than 24 hours had passed since Carol went missing, they couldn't file a missing person report. At this point, they also considered the possibility that Carol might have run away from home. But Norma wasn't ready to accept that Carol would ever leave her home on her own or run away from her family. She had a strong feeling that something bad had happened to her daughter. Because of this, Norma and Jerry didn't want to sit and wait for the police to do something about it. They decided to take matters in their own hands and actively search for Carol themselves. They went around their neighborhood, talking to neighbors to see if anyone had seen Carol the previous night. Most of the neighbors remembered seeing Carol around 8 p.m. when she left home, but no one had spotted her coming back home that night. Norma and Jerry also visited all of Carol's friends' houses to find out if she had spoken to anyone or gone to their homes, but they couldn't find any trace of her. The sudden disappearance of Carol deeply affected Norma, and the entire community also came together after the news that their little Carol was missing to help in any way they could. At the same time, the police were also actively searching for Carol. They checked various stores, both nearby Carol's house and more distant, to see if she had visited any of them that night. Unfortunately, no one could confirm seeing her at any of those locations. The police noticed that there was a security camera outside the store that Carol was supposed to go. However, upon reviewing the footage, they couldn't find any evidence of Carol visiting the store on the night she disappeared. Back in those days, security cameras were not as common as it is today, so only a few stores had installed them, making it challenging to track Carol's movements. But it didn't take long for a tragic discovery to occur. On the evening of December 14, 1976, Carol's half-brother Jerry stumbled upon her lifeless body under unusual circumstances. He had been searching the neighborhood on his own, desperately trying to find Carol. His search led him to the end of the street near a building that was still under construction. This building was located at 418 Imperial Drive, close to a lake. It was there that Jerry claimed to have discovered Carol's body. The details surrounding how he came across her in this specific spot remain a mystery. Carol's lifeless body was found floating in the water, her clothes partially removed. This sight was shocking and deeply disturbing for Jerry. He immediately contacted the Largo police to report the discovery, and then had the difficult task of returning home to inform Norma about the heartbreaking news. When the police arrived, they carefully retrieved Carol's body from the lake to preserve any potential evidence. It became evident quite quickly that Carol's death wasn't accidental. The presence of injuries on her body and a concrete block used to submerge her indicated foul play, suggesting that someone intentionally killed her and attempted to hide her body. The The police believed that the attack likely occurred at the under-construction house, and then her body was placed in the lake. A crucial clue was Carol's watch, which was stopped at 10:36 p.m., indicating the time of her murder was likely between 10:30 and 10:45 p.m. After Carol's lifeless body was sent for a thorough autopsy, some unsettling facts came to light. The coroner found that Carol had been strangled, which likely made her lose consciousness but didn't kill her right away. Additionally, she had suffered from a blow to the head with a heavy object, resulting in a severe injury. Adding to the distressing findings, Carol also had a significant burn on her thigh. The medical examiner's report uncovered an even more horrifying detail. When Carol was thrown into the water and a heavy concrete block was placed over her body, she was still alive. Despite the harrowing circumstances, she remained conscious and tragically succumbed to drowning over time. During the examination of Carol's body, the coroner also discovered 3 long hairs that were of the same person but seemed to belong to someone other than her. Additionally, a 4th hair, unidentified and possibly belonging to the killer, was found on Carol's blue jeans. This discovery held the potential to be a crucial breakthrough in the case. However, the limitations of medical technology in the 1970s meant that not much could be done with the hairs at that time. So they were carefully stored away, awaiting the development of more advanced techniques that could help identify the person responsible for Carol's tragic fate. For a little while, the Largo police had their eyes on Jerry Irwin, Carol's half-brother, because he was also outside on the night Carol was killed. Even though Jerry said he was on a date, the police discovered he got done half an hour earlier than he claimed. This made them wonder what was he doing during that time gap. The restaurant he went to was only about 8 minutes away from home, so why didn't he return home soon? The police started thinking that Jerry might be involved in Carol's death, since he couldn't provide an alibi for that time gap. They concentrated their investigation on him, but it didn't lead to any solid evidence. They couldn't find any proof that Jerry could have hurt Carol. Norma, Carol's mother, was convinced that Jerry cared deeply for his sister that would never hurt her. Despite their initial suspicion, the focus on Jerry didn't bring them any closer to the truth. The police cleared Jerry of suspicion as they couldn't find any more evidence against him. For the next 18 months, the police put a lot of effort into exploring every lead. But unfortunately, they couldn't find any clues to solve the case, and the investigation only went in circles. As time went on, the investigation began to lose momentum and the case grew cold. This left the Hutto family with aching questions. What really happened to Carol on that fateful night? Who was responsible for her death? They not only suffered the loss of their beloved daughter, but also the frustration of not finding justice for her. For almost 20 years, the mystery of Carol's murder remained unsolved. But in March 1994, a twist of fate brought a fresh set of eyes to the case. Officer Brad Hoyes, sidelined by a work injury, found himself poring over cold case files during his desk duty. As he sifted through the forgotten files, he stumbled upon the haunting details of Carol Hutto's murder case, reigniting a dormant investigation. As Officer Brad delved into the case, he sensed that there were hidden layers that hadn't received thorough scrutiny during the original 1976 investigation. Driven by his intuition, he made the bold decision to reopen the case and retrieve the evidence box that had been stowed away for years. Among the contents, he stumbled across Carol's personal diary. Officer Brad saw potential in those pages, hoping the diary might hold the missing pieces needed to unravel the mystery of Carol's tragic end. A few pages into the diary, Carol wrote about her secret romance with her classmate. It was back in 1976 when Carol was 16 years old. She had a major crush on a 17-year-old boy, James Brian Kuhn, born July 20th, 1959, also known as Jimmy Kuhn. They both were juniors at Largo High School and used to talk to each other all the time at school. The whispers of their closeness spread among the school corridors, but they chose to play it cool and never openly acknowledged their relationship. It was Kuhn who asked Carol to keep the relationship a secret, as his family was really strict, so they decided to hide it from everyone. At one point, Carol also claimed that she was so in love with Kuhn. Kuhn was also among the attendees at Carol's funeral, who appeared genuinely sorrowful and far from a suspect. In 1976, during the initial investigation, Kuhn was also questioned as a friend of Carol, and he claimed he hadn't seen or spoken to her on the night of the murder, asserting that he was at home the entire time. However, in 1994, when cold case detectives revisited the case, they spotted a discrepancy between Kuhn's statements and what the Hutto family had originally told the police. They revealed that on the fateful night of December 13, 1976, Carol had received a phone call from none other than Jimmy Kuhn. By this time, Kuhn was 34 years old and had become a father to a daughter. Following his graduation, he pursued a path in the U.S. Navy where he achieved significant success. His military career was marked by his role as a submariner stationed at the U.S. Naval Submarine Base in Connecticut. Age 43 had a personal connection to the case. He too had attended the same Largo High School as Kuhn and Carol, so when he got to know about the case, he took the lead in investigating Carol's murder. Working alongside him was Lieutenant John Carroll, who is currently Largo's deputy chief. In a bold move, they made an unexpected trip to Connecticut, where Kuhn, an 11-year military veteran, was stationed. During this encounter, Kuhn's story drastically changed. He contradicted his earlier statements and confessed that he had indeed seen Carol on the night of her disappearance. He barely remembered anything, Sergeant Mike Short recalled. According to Mike, Kuhn explained, "I put up walls. If I remember, I'm going to jail." These words left a strong impression on Mike, leading him to believe that he had identified Carol's killer. However, the following day, Kuhn changed his stance. He sought legal advice, refused further interviews, and declined to take a polygraph test. The police and prosecutors faced a challenge as they lacked enough evidence to definitively prove that Kuhn was the one who had killed Carol on the night of December 13, 1976. Convicting him of first-degree murder seemed unlikely. Due to the statute of limitations, anything less than first degree might result in Kuhn going free. The evidence box held an even more intriguing discovery. Among the items in the box, Detective Mike came across a collection of unfamiliar hairs, retrieved from both Carol's body and the crime scene, and these hairs had been diligently preserved. During the late 1980s, a pivotal moment in forensic science emerged, which was the utilization of DNA testing to establish whether someone was guilty or innocent in criminal investigations. As the 1990s progressed, the approach shifted towards examining mitochondrial DNA, which resides in small structures within human cells and is more likely to endure the test of time. Given these advancements, Mike was eager to conduct a genetic test on the hairs to potentially unveil the true identity of the perpetrator. However, there was a problem. They didn't have a sample of Kuhn's DNA, which was a crucial element for the testing. To obtain this vital piece of evidence, the detectives needed to obtain Kuhn's blood through a legal search warrant. With this plan in mind, they aimed to maximize the time spent with the suspect and decided to proceed strategically. In 1998, Detective Mike decided to bring in the reinforcements in the form of the Naval Criminal Investigation Service, or NCIS. They thought the presence of naval officials might make Kuhn nervous and lead him to a confession. On July 15, 1998, Detective Mike waited outside the police interrogation room, while Navy investigators Tom Asimos and Dave Early sat down with their murder suspect, James Kuhn. After obtaining the necessary warrant, they first collected a blood sample from Kuhn for further testing. Then Asimos and Early began their conversation with Kuhn, aiming to make him feel supported and comfortable. Their goal was to build trust, so that he might open up and gradually reveal the truth. At this moment, the NCIS agents were confident that Kuhn was on the verge of disclosing what happened on the night of December 13, 1976. Surprisingly, without any solid proof, they managed to make Kuhn break down as he wiped away his tears and finally revealed the heartbreaking truth about how he killed his girlfriend, Carol Hutto. Although Kuhn appeared emotional, the experienced cold case detectives weren't convinced of his honesty. The injuries Carol sustained, particularly to her neck and head, didn't align with a simple accident like tripping and falling. Instead, the nature of these injuries indicated blunt force trauma and strangulation. However, Kuhn had confessed to causing Carol's death. Although he claimed it was an accident, he took the responsibility for her demise, explaining that he failed to help her and attempted to conceal both the evidence and her body. As a result, Kuhn was taken into custody and anticipated his trial. However, on the eve of his trial, he presented a new version of events. In his alternative version of events, Kuhn initially claimed that there were no physical interactions between him and Carol, even though he wanted it. However, things took a different turn when Carol disagreed. Their disagreement escalated into a physical confrontation. Carol started screaming and fighting back by scratching and hitting him. Fearing her screams would draw attention, Kuhn struck her with a 2x4 piece of wood and even tightened his grip around her throat. When he finally let go, Carol fell to the floor, unconscious. Kuhn was panicked and unsure, so he made a hasty decision to hide her body. He also tried to create confusion by burning her thigh, hoping it would appear as though someone else had attacked her. Regardless of the details in Kuhn's different versions of events, detectives arrived at the same conclusion, that Carol had been assaulted, taken to the lake, and thrown face down. Her body was weighed down with a concrete block to keep it submerged. Interestingly, the second story Kuhn shared appeared more plausible and aligned better with the evidence discovered. This version of events seemed to match the physical evidence and circumstances surrounding Carol's tragic fate. As the trial day arrived on February 9, 2000, the prosecutors aimed for a first-degree murder conviction against Kuhn. His lawyers acknowledged that he had some involvement in the crime, but they argued that a more fitting verdict could be manslaughter or even third-degree murder. When the jury received the case, they took just 22 minutes to deliberate before reaching a verdict. Kuhn was found guilty of first-degree murder. There's a chance that Kuhn could experience freedom once more. Due to the fact that the crime occurred in 1976, Pinellas Pasco Circuit Court Judge Philip Federico applied the state laws from that year. These laws allow someone convicted of first-degree murder to be considered for parole after 25 years. Interestingly, Kuhn chose not to address the court during the sentencing. Carol's mother felt the need to address Kuhn. She expressed how Carol had trusted him and called him out, saying, "James Kuhn, you took the trust Carol gave you, and you used it for your depraved wants." Norma's words did not stop there. She pointed out that Kuhn had attended Carol's funeral, pretending to be upset and acting like her friend while hiding his true intentions. Norma hoped that he would never leave prison and didn't deserve a chance to start anew, emphasizing that he had taken that chance away from her daughter. Norma, a mother with high hopes for her young daughter Carol, had envisioned a bright future. She eagerly anticipated the day when Carol would proudly graduate from Largo High School. She had dreams of seeing her 16-year-old wearing a stunning white dress, walking down the aisle to embark on a joyful journey with her husband, and maybe even starting a family. However, all those dreams were shattered in a single night, and strongly desired that Kuhn would remain in prison forever, never to be released. So let's talk about Kuhn's case. What are your thoughts on whether he deserved a life sentence or not? And do you think he was really sorry about what he did? And do you believe Kuhn's actions towards Carol were accidental, or was it all planned out? Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.